Konnichiwa everyone, and welcome to the Winter Court Podcast, where we focus on competitive play in Fantasy Flight Games' upcoming LCG, Legend of the Five Rings. I am your host, Travis McDaniel, and I am joined by my co-host today, returning host, Alex Gentry, and replacement special guest, Dan Henley, also known as Danwarr. Welcome to the show. Why don't you guys introduce yourselves?
So obviously I was here last time. I am Alex Gentry. Because I forgot to mention it last time, also Dark Destroy on the Discord server and Reddit thread, and our replacement special guest over here.
Yeah, I'm Dan Henley, also known as Danwarr on the Discord and on Reddit. And because I'm perfectly new, I'm going to introduce myself a little bit more. So I actually never played L5R historically, but I did play a lot of FFG's other LCGs. I was really big into Netrunner when that came out, and played that pretty competitively for a while. Dabbled in their other LCGs, and this new L5R just looks fantastic from FFG, from everything we've seen so far, and I'm really interested because it just looks like the perfect amalgamation of everything from all their other games. So that's a little bit about me.
Yeah, I definitely agree, coming from the L5R scene. Who knows, we may have even played each other at an event and not realized it, because I can't remember the name of every single person I've played ever in an LCG. But glad to have you on board, Dan, especially as such a prominent member in the community, and we're looking forward to hearing some of your opinions, because today we are going to cover the Crane cards, most predominantly because we got most of those cards spoiled a couple of weeks ago from FFG. Due to our recording scheduling, we couldn't get them a little sooner, but we're going to be opening up with some talk on Gencon, and then we're going to get into the meat of the episode, which will be talking about these Crane cards. We're going to be analyzing what we think from a competitive perspective, and me and Gentry have both gotten some games on tabletop, and I know Dan has watched me play a couple of games with another Discord user known as Kift. So we're hoping to use some of that gameplay experience to sort of form a foundation and a basis for our opinions and judgment of these cards. So let's go right into it. So Gencon is coming up in a few months, and the registration window opened up last weekend on Sunday. Many people, myself included, were waiting to click the button, the big shiny wishlist button, as soon as the registration window opened. And notably, of course, whenever there's a gateway like this on an event on the internet, server problems can tend to be prominent, and there are definitely some people experiencing that. So most notably, what makes this news is that a lot of people really wanted to get into L5R events, more so than I think anyone, including Fantasy Flight and Gencon themselves, even anticipated. That even though a bunch of people were there as soon as tickets were available, the queue ended up very quickly becoming more than 4,000, 5,000 people long, and by the time about 1,500 of those people had gone through the queue, most of the major events had sold out, and by about 2,500 they were completely unavailable. And this has of course caused a bit of controversy in the community about who thinks FFG should have had more seats, or if Gencon's system was terrible. Well, obviously a lot of people are very upset because they based Gencon around the L5R release, and then found out that these events had sold out and they will not be getting a ticket. So we're going to talk a little bit about this. Why don't you guys give your opening thoughts on like what this means in general, and is it good or bad for the game as a whole?
Well, I find that everybody loves a good scandal, and that's kind of what this is, I guess, to some degree. But it doesn't surprise me too much. I mean, in the past, FFG has been notoriously bad at getting enough product and enough events, seating and stuff out to people that want it. They're horribly infamous for, underselling what they actually believe is going to happen. Like I think they definitely believe that they're never going to sell quite as much as they do at any point in time, and they always underproduce because of that. But at the same time, it excites me a lot to see that there's so much interest in it, that there's so much more interest that even they thought was going to be in the game, because a lot of the problem with LCGs specifically is getting them off the ground to begin with and getting the interest going. So the fact that there's so many people interested in it, that they couldn't even that they were sold out in like a minute, and beyond that, it's impressive to me. But I think that they have the ability to kind of fix it beforehand. Gencon's a long ways off, so they have some ability to wiggle around.
I do believe that most of what you said I agree with. In terms of Gen Con releases, the FFG has been really... they've had like basically a big Gen Con release almost every year, and every year they've been a little off on it. They've like either run out of product, they underestimated demand, things sell out really quickly, some people get annoyed. But generally, at least in my experience, it ends up being a relatively smooth launch through Gen Con, through that. This is, of course, their biggest launch ever. Like ever, way more so than they did with Game of Thrones, which was the last major LCG. I know that Arkham Horror came out, but I don't believe that was quite as built up as Game of Thrones was, considering there were a lot of returning players for that, just like there are for L5R coming in. And I remember Game of Thrones sold out. It took at least, I think it took like an hour or maybe 2 hours before like all the tickets for the inaugural for that, but these tickets were gone out the gate, and by the time the processor was like 15 minutes into processing all of these initial requests, they were gone. So you can essentially say they sold out within seconds.
Yeah, it's definitely their biggest one. I think Game of Thrones is around 310, 320 from the numbers that I've heard, and L5R being at 350 is huge. So I think a lot of people are mad at FFG when they should really be upset with Gen Con and not letting FFG make the event a little bit bigger. So FFG obviously has to run a number of other events too. So they've got to maximize as much table space as they can for all the games that they're anticipating. And I think they just underestimated how big L5R was going to be compared to their other games. And I think the big one for me especially is, so Netrunner's North American Championships are actually at Gen Con every year. And they had 288 seats available for the priority tickets. And as of right now, so that would be June 4th, there are 208 tickets available. So only 80 people have signed up for Netrunner compared to 350 for L5R.
Yeah, and it definitely begs the question, like these sort of, we're starting to see this sort of life cycle of LCGs where old ones sort of like lose popularity after a couple of cycles, and then the new one comes out, and it seems almost like everyone shifts over to the new LCG until it dies out, and then so on and so forth. Now, I'm hoping that's not the case, and I'm hoping it's more just a case that maybe people are just excited for new stuff, and then they end up returning to their old favorites, or they end up finding a new favorite every single time they release a new LCG, because maybe FFG just keeps making better and better games for those people.
So my personal conspiracy theory is, and a number of my friends share this, is actually that FFG actually wants people to do that. They just want to kind of recycle the same number of customers over and over again, given how they kind of supported Netrunner in the last couple years. Obviously, that's just kind of crackpot, right? It's just kind of joking. But we're kind of seeing it with Netrunner. It's kind of on the decline. Game of Thrones is a little bit more popular, but not by much.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, I've definitely read, and I can kind of see where you're coming from with this conspiracy theory. It certainly does. It's like probably not really a secret that a majority of sales for FFG come from a very casual market and people who aren't interested in playing the game at the competitive levels, buying 3 core sets in every single cycle pack. So I believe that a majority, it's sensible to think that a good part of the profit from an LCG comes from selling the big boxes, the boxes that people see on store shelves that are in like board game size boxes that they can buy, and then they buy the big box expansions for that to sort of augment that experience. And not many people buy the chapter packs, except for the diehards, who, like, it can be really easy to think that that's the main audience when you can't see the tabletop gamers out there that are also playing like single core Netrunner and single core Game of Thrones, and especially I know this is really popular, the casual like tabletop game of Arkham Horror now. I know that's really popular among some of the board game guys that I know.
Yeah, so I actually play Arkham Horror as well. I played a lot of Lord of the Rings LCG, which is their old co-op LCG too, so I was really excited to see what they kind of tweaked for this one. And most people do, in fact, buy just a single core. So FFG's internal data shows that most people buy a single core and never buy anything else. So that's sort of what they're marketing for with these cores, and that's kind of why we're going to see kind of a Game of Thrones-esque distribution of cards with the L5R core, is what everybody's anticipating anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh, go ahead.
sorry. The other thing I kind of noticed too is like the problem that you have with most card games, even, but especially with LCGs that just continue on for kind of forever, indefinitely, are that as you go on, it becomes harder and harder to get into a game. But more and more people will drop out. Like eventually, the people that played the game for a long time, you're bound to have at least a few people here. They lose interest as a new set comes out. They feel something is unbalanced, or they feel that like a new mechanic is unfun, or something like that. Because you can't please everybody. And I feel like that's true of pretty much every card game. Like the only way that you avoid things like that are to do kind of what Magic does, in that you have rotating sets in standard and things like that, so that you have a limited card pool that changes constantly, so that everybody always has a fresh start, and there's only like so many cards that can be played. But traditionally with LCGs, because the card pool is as big as it is, and because it just continues to build, and there aren't any like cycle outs necessarily that I've ever seen. At least this isn't something that FFG has ever done in the past. At least I feel like the sales will almost always be much higher when the game comes out, and then drop off as it continues. So it makes sense for them to continue to release games over and over again, release new games constantly, because they probably make significantly more money doing that.
So there is an LCG rotation. We have not had an LCG reach the rotation point yet. Netrunner is right on the cusp of it. And then Netrunner is about to lose its first 2 cycles with, I think, the cycle after the current one, which is the Red Sands?
Yes.
The Mars cycle, yes. Whether or not that cycle should be as long as it is a topic of great debate, especially among Netrunner players. I personally think it should probably be a little smaller, but FFG does have a somewhat nice buy-in model, even though it doesn't have like a very tight rotation like Magic. The core sets and big boxes are evergreen, as people say, so they're always legal, and they tend to have very crucial key card pieces that are like form a foundation of a lot of like very I don't want to say good stuff, but like they form basic strategies for every faction, I should say. They form a foundation, and then the data packs tend to give you these like side strategies, such as like I know Stealth came out in the first one, Creation and Control for Netrunner, and but like they would introduce new strategies such as Stealth Breakers or the Conspiracy Breakers and stuff like that to Netrunner within data packs. So they'd be like these offshoot strategies, while the big boxes had the core strategies.
Yeah, and the core set power level for Netrunner is very, very good. A lot of the cards from the core are still very viable for competitive play, and that's actually one of the things that's exciting about L5R, because we know the core is going to be good, and given FFG's rotation policy, all of those cards are going to be evergreen. So we know there's going to be a base power level outside of the core that should be pretty good. It's just how those evolve from there. And I'm totally with you on Netrunner rotation. It probably should have rotated about a year ago when the Mumbad cycle came out. And they've just waited a little bit too long. And the card pool is a little bit more onerous and difficult to navigate, and difficult for someone to buy in, I think, because there's cards you need from older sets. But given that maybe 40 to 45% of the cards in Netrunner are playable, most of the cards you're going to get in a data pack are garbage, and that's unfortunate.
Yeah. Bringing it back to Gencon, however, so what this means for L5R, I hope, is that it'll have a big player base, and what we need to do as a community is make sure that that player base sustains and try to keep it going and keep people interested, and then hopefully FFG augments that by providing a strong competitive scene for people to play the game in, or have local game night kits, and continue to like get cool promos and get out to the store and play the game and build up that scene. Yeah.
So it's important to note too, just because people didn't get tickets for the release tournament on Thursday or some of the other tournaments for the rest of the weekend, you can still buy cores at the FFG booth, which is important. Additionally, you can still buy generic tickets on the off chance you might be able to get in with the general admission. That's a little bit of a long shot, but it's there.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely going to be L5R to play. In my experience in past Gen Cons, despite the overwhelming demand, I was always able to get my hands on at least one, but usually all 3 core sets needed to have a full play set at the release of those events. I did that for Conquest, I did it for Thrones 2.0. I was at Gen Con last year. I wasn't terribly interested in the Arkham Horror LCG, but I saw that they were definitely still on sale when I was going through the FFG booth, so if I wanted to, I could get them. So I don't think that saying if you miss the event, you're not going to get to play any L5R seems a bit hyperbolic, especially with how many people are complaining about missing the event. I'm pretty sure we can get you some people to play the games.
The other thing too is I think that FFG understands how marketing works to some degree. As a company in general, I'm almost positive that they're ramping up production as we speak, in response to all of the interest in the game, and there's probably going to be plenty of product at the event, probably significantly more than they planned on bringing initially.
That's something we can't guarantee. We can assume that a print run for a game, so like if they wanted to make like whole new copies of the core set, right? They have to send everything to the printers, and that can take probably a few months to print and then assemble all these new packages. So they may not be able to get new product in before Gen Con. So what I'm personally thinking is that they obviously anticipated a huge demand with a 350-person inaugural tournament and 2 other tournaments in the same Gen Con. I believe they probably overprinted a bunch of extra core sets for sale, sort of like expecting the demand for the new LCG. And I think that FFG has learned from past experiences a little bit, and to send in new shipments, new pallets overnight at Gen Con is something I've seen them do in the past. So I'm not terribly worried about product, but then again, I wasn't terribly worried about getting a ticket either, and here I am with no ticket. So anything can happen, but I have good faith that FFG will pull through, and especially after seeing the demand, if they can print new stuff, I'm almost certain they are.
Yeah, so typically FFG has a 5 to 6 month lead time on production cycles. So the first line of L5R is pretty much done at this point, and they're just setting up distribution channels, as far as I understand. A bigger issue there would be their announcement for exclusivity with Alliance, because we're anticipating L5R release in October, and if FFG is distributing exclusively through Alliance, that means stores and online retailers are only to be able to get it through the one company, and I know historically they've had some warehouse issues.
Yeah, we definitely saw some distribution issues with Star Wars Destiny in the past, where like stores would not get their orders, or they would get them late, or they would not get as many as they did order, things like that. And I'm hoping that with an LCG over the more collectible nature, where you can't really predict exactly how many packs someone's going to buy. They could buy anywhere from 2 boxes to 2 packs. With an LCD, you can kind of predict that a little more. You can kind of get an understanding of how much each individual person is going to buy, so you can kind of meet that demand a bit better.
Yeah, this is also true. And I mean, like I said, that FFG is kind of notorious for not quite having enough product on initial release, but they've always been reasonable at least fixing the problem relatively quickly. And hopefully they've learned from past experiences. I feel like they probably have. So like between it being an LCG and them kind of understanding from a business perspective and from past experiences, what we're at, even if there's problems at Gen Con getting product, and I don't see there being too much of a problem, I'm sure that there won't be too much of an issue on actual release, on the actual public release.
No, I do think that the actual public release will go rather smoothly. Once product does hit the stores, which if we look at FFG's games in the past, will probably be about a month or 2 after Gen Con. So I expect early November at the absolute latest, but anywhere from like late September to mid-October probably is the expected date. So for those who didn't get a ticket, and I know there's a lot of you out there,
Me.
Fine, yeah. I think none
Yeah,
of us.
all of us.
All
Yeah,
three of
all of us.
Although I don't think you were planning on going to Gen Con, Gentry, so you count in spirit. I know you wouldn't.
Well, I
have
mean,
got
I tried to get a
if you
ticket
tried to.
anyway, but it didn't. Yeah.
But there will be tons of people out there, myself included, trying to get people together to play this game. Because from what I've played of it already, using online means, I am already in love. I'm going to be playing this game all Gen Con long. As well, it's worth noting that myself and a couple of other community members are trying to get together and organize an unofficial event where people can come play L5R. We're not sure if it's going to be like super competitive, but I'm hopefully going to be able to use a laser cutter at my university's department to create some custom acrylic tokens and stuff like that we can give out as like prizes for like those who are like best of clan and stuff like that. So like hopefully we'll have something where people can get together and play L5R, because I think that's ultimately what people want. They just want to play the game, and they just want to like be part of the community. And it really sucks that part of the community in this case meant 350 people, and that's the cutoff, because apparently it's a lot bigger than that. So let's expand it out there. Make sure you find people, play games, introduce yourself, have a good time. It's still Gen Con, the best 4 days in gaming. It's not all about L5R. And even though you may not have gotten to the main events, there's still plenty of L5R to be had, even if it is all about L5R to you.
Yeah, you mentioned it, Travis, but I think the r/L5R Discord is getting pretty active about getting unofficial stuff together. Everyone's pretty excited to play the game, which is great. It's great to see a lot of hype and passion for this new game that's coming out, and hopefully we're going to get a really exciting release and just exciting four days playing L5R and whatever else we do at Gen Con.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to meeting a lot of the people on the Discord. And for those of you who haven't been a part of the Discord yet, you can join it. There's a link in the r/L5R subreddit. Right there, you can just click it and it'll log you in. The cool thing about Discord is that you can just use it in browser, or you can download the full app, but you can basically access it from anywhere. There's also a really handy phone app, and there's a ton of discussion going on in the Discord all the time about new card spoilers, RPG fans galore. There's a ton of RP channels or things to find groups for the tabletop RPG. And in general, you can just come and hang out and jock talk with us, because we always like to talk in there.
Just general banter.
Yeah, there's tons of banter, all sorts of stuff. So that's about, I think, all we really have to say about Gen Con. I do think that people are maybe overreacting a little bit. Obviously, I believe FFG did everything they could to try and accommodate as many people as they can for this release. Gen Con did come out and say that there could be new events added in the future, that they are allowing that. So keep an eye on the Gen Con website and the FFG events, because there may be a new L5R event added there, or maybe new seats get added to previous events, though I'm not holding out on the inaugural getting many more seats, because 350 is already sort of an unprecedented number to try and organize and keep together. So keep your eye on that, and you may get lucky. And if nothing else, you can always just show up at Gen Con with some generic tickets. And those who do will almost certainly find a spot in at least one of those if you get there early enough.
Before the Scorpion Stealth Tournament.
Yeah. The Hidden Scorpion Tournament, yeah. Of course,
everyone
knows about
L5R. For
Street L5R. That's how real men play L5R, Street L5R. Alright, so we're going to move on to the Crane Clan review. So this is going to be the bulk of our episode today. We're going to look through all the Crane cards. We're going to go in core set number order. So we're going to start with the Stronghold, and we're going to basically give you a rundown of each card, and each of us is going to start a different card. So I'll take the first card, then Gentry will start off the second card, and then Dan will start off the third card. And then we'll cycle through until we get all the cards. So let's begin with the Stronghold. The Stronghold for the Crane is Shizuka Toshi. Shizuka Toshi provides +2 strength to the province that it is within. It provides 11 starting honor, the standard 7 fate per turn. That seems to be, I say standard, but we've only seen 2 strongholds, but I'm almost certain the core set will be all 7 fate strongholds. And 10 influence, which also seems to be a standard so far from what we've seen. The main reason to bring Shizuka Toshi as your stronghold is that you get to play the Crane clan, which is of course the best clan, and there's no arguments, period. Also, you get the action that during a political conflict you may bow the stronghold to choose a participating character with political skill 2 or less, and bow that character as well. So the Crane
Travis
already
may or
have
may
it.
not be biased towards
I
Crane.
may or may not be biased toward Crane.
There's absolutely no
To be
bias
fair,
on this
I'm gonna say
podcast
this.
at all.
I'm actually the real troll here is every single time I talk about a clan, I'm just going to say it's the best clan.
That's
Except
great.
for Crab, I'll laugh after that because I can't say that with a straight face.
Fantastic.
All right, sorry, Crab fans. I'm sorry your clan sucks. It's fact. There's definitely no opinions within the world of L5R. So the Stronghold here, what it does, I have found, is it makes political conflicts against the Crane kind of difficult for a lot of clans. Now, obviously, most of the games I've played have been Crane mirrors because those are the most cards we've seen, but I imagine it's been effective against those in a lot of cases. And a lot of other factions don't have many characters we've seen with above 2 political skill. So this Stronghold will wreck you. If you attack into a Crane player in a political conflict, they can bow your character right away. So you probably want to send 2 characters. Or 1 character with 3 or more strength, in which case that's about the only thing you can do. So you're kind of committed to overcommitting against the Crane player in political conflicts, or else you're going to be really sad when you lose 2 strength to the Stronghold.
As I say, admittedly, like looking at the few other cards that we actually have access to from any of the other clans and everything, 2 political skill is a pretty sizable number. Like it's actually not that low of an, or not that high of a number, but like the amount of cards that we've seen with 3 or more political skill is largely Crane based, and they're kind of the political faction. So I'd imagine that this card ends up outside of a Crane mirror, of course, which is again most of the experiences we've had playing the game. But outside of a Crane mirror, this card seems absolutely absurd, honestly. Although I imagine most of the Strongholds will be very good, but it seems very, very good. It seems like it'll be able to stop most things that aren't, high cost.
So with political skill definitely seeming like it's a premium in the cards that we've seen, this card just seems fantastic. It's just a good Stronghold ability. You're basically going to fire it every single turn, and it's going to wreck your opponent's day. It's just a good card.
Oh yeah, definitely. I think skill in general, like when I first saw this card, I was a little lukewarm on it. Like 2, that's not that much. So I guess it gets rid of like a weenie guy, and that's all well and good. That's not bad as like a baseline ability to just say like, hey, one of your guys is nullified. But it turns out that 2 seems to be like kind of like a standard. It's sort of like it's like the threshold of like, okay, 2 political skill is an okay stat, and that's like acceptable on most characters. And when you get to 3 and 4 skill, that's when you start to get to like the ceiling of most characters' skill like reach, except for clan champions, which we know are a little bit more ridiculous, as they should be. But like for most of your deck, you're gonna have a lot of characters that just aren't gonna meet this threshold, and it's gonna be really sad. So great Stronghold. I'm thinking it's going to be, it sets up like a staple control archetype for the Crane, just being able to bow a person every turn. It's solid across the board. Well, we only have the Lion Stronghold to compare it to, but I think it's a good foundation for the control-based clan.
A Lion card that we've seen that it controls is Lion's Pride Brawler, which we assume to be good, and basically that means if the Lion wants to get in with that card at all, they're going to have to do it on a military conflict, which seems like a waste given that they already have strong military cards anyway. So if you're controlling the game that way too, that's awesome.
Yeah, like so many cards we've seen from the military factions are like at most 2 political skill. So those factions that are struggling in politics are going to struggle even more against the Crane clan. They're going to really exploit that weakness. Now, whether or not the Crane can therefore stand up to their military might, yet to be seen. Lion's looking a little scary, but that's for another episode. So let's move on now to the province. So Gentry, why don't you read and tell us what the Art of Peace does?
All right, so one of the few provinces we've actually gotten to see is the Art of Peace. It is a 4-strength province that reads, when this province is broken, dishonor each attacking character and honor each defending character. And this, I feel, going into the way that Crane plays, being a heavy control faction, the only problem I actually see with this card is that it does only activate when it is broken. But otherwise, honoring all of your characters at a province and dishonoring all of your opponent's characters at a province, especially in a faction that I think we've determined is very, very much set up to try and force your opponent to overcommit for fights as much as possible and send 3, 4, 5 units at a province to try and break it if they want to have any chance at it at all. The province seems fairly strong. I find it's likely that this province ends up being one, and in the small play that we've played, ended up very much being one that you just try and avoid breaking. You just kind of leave it alone, and once you reveal it, and hope that you don't have to go for it.
It should also be noted that it has the air element on it. We don't know exactly what those elements on the provinces are for necessarily, but we think it might be linked to deck building.
Yeah, and being a province that honors and dishonors people, the air elements is very, very fitting. So this province, this freaking province, I do think this is a really cool control province, right? So you know where your provinces are at the beginning of the game. Your opponent does not. So if you're against a lion player and they play like 3 characters and they're going to ham and they're just trying to break your provinces as quickly as possible, and they swing into this, you just might let them have it and then throw in a couple of like chuds that don't make it so the province isn't broken, and then that lion player just like got 3 dishonorable characters, you got some honorable characters, that's an honor swing, and that can be huge. It's so cool. I love this province. And like, even if they don't, the name is so apt because if they don't break it, they're actually trying to not break it. They're trying to win the conflict but not break it or not attack it at all. So like, it's called the art of peace. And so like, you're trying to commit warfare without actually like making warfare, like not having successful warfare. So I don't know, it's kind of cool. I love that.
Yeah, the card is perfect thematically and it's incredibly powerful. I think from everything that we've seen. So, like you said, I actually think the best use of this card is to try and induce your opponent to break it. So sometimes that can even mean maybe not defending, but if your opponent overcommits and you can get a guy in there and get him honored, that's great. But I think the biggest strength of the card is actually that it's going to dishonor guys. Because not only is dishonor an honor swing, but it can be a stat swing. Because dishonored characters can almost be worth nothing from some of the glory stats that we've seen. So just having dishonored characters on board that might last for another turn can be huge.
Yeah, and like with Crane, you have a lot of 0 military and 1 military low-cost characters that you're probably only keeping around for a turn, maybe 2. So just like throwing them in there, just like to just get you an honor, seems all right, and prevent the uncontested penalty, whatever that may be in actuality. So yeah, it's a great province. I expect most of the clan provinces to be of a similar power scale. We've seen Endless Plains for Unicorn and Mori Kuroi from the Phoenix. I'm kind of iffy on Endless Plains, but it does fit the Unicorn Tempo style. But Mori Kuroi seems about the same power level as this, which is to say, pretty darn good. So expect to see this play every single time you play Crane, every single time you attack into a province. It's never going to be on their stronghold due to the interrupt happening when it's broken. So every single time you attack into one of their 4 provinces, you're going to potentially be swinging into the Art of Peace, and so you should keep that in mind.
4 province strength also isn't negligible at all. It's a big guy.
Yeah, 4 province strength seems to be the about the average. It seems to be the expected good level. The only province we've seen lower than that is Shameful Display, and that's made up for by Shameful Display's ridiculous action to honor and dishonor a single guy in the conflict. Two people, rather. If you pick 1 to honor and 1 to dishonor. So,
yeah, to be noted too. A lot of during like the play that I've seen too, it very much looks like they're trying to implement some kind of deterrent in a lot of the decks to just swinging into a blind province with the intent of breaking it, and I feel like especially for things like Lion Clan that has the ability to just throw a bunch of really big dudes on the board. Turn 1, they can throw like 7 or 8 military strength on the board. Turn 1 pretty easy if they need to. It might be some kind of deterrent that they're putting into place for multiple clans, but definitely for Crane, at the very least, to just try and stop tempo and try and like keep the game pace at a certain spot. To slow it down slightly.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure how much this slows down aggressive decks, especially if they're playing lots of guys with no fate. but it does accelerate a honor victory if you're able to get that honored status on a few of your characters. So it fits into that control plan. It does punish just wildly attacking with a bunch of guys into your provinces. Again, control. Anytime you make your opponent, anytime like this is still face down, your opponent has to think about it. It's going to affect the decisions they make. They're going to throw weaker challenges at you. So that in turn does slow down the game. So good province. It'll see play. Expect it. There's not much else to really say because we don't have a whole lot of other clan comparisons, but it fits right into the Grain MO. Get honor, bow guys, win the game somehow.
How would you compare it to the Phoenix one?
So the Phoenix one sort of just like stuffs, like once the Phoenix one is face up, it sort of like stuffs a conflict in some way. You either get the ring effect, so like you either have to attack with a bunch of balanced guys, otherwise you can have a huge stat swing because they can defend with political guys in your military conflict and then switch it. Or you have to just accept the fact that you're not going to get a good ring. I think the real strength of Mori Kuroi is definitely in the conflict swapping and not the ring swapping as much. The conflict swapping will definitely hurt quite a few decks. And that one, unlike this one, can go right on the Phoenix Stronghold. So I think Phoenix might make a natural ally with the Crane, being what looks to be another control-y type of faction with lots of bow effects and some manipulation of rings and conflicts.
Yeah, it should be noted too that because of the fact that Mori Kuroi actually happens every combat, not just when it breaks, and I feel like it's fairly different in that, you know, the Phoenix seems to be the Phoenix province rather seems to be a little bit more about winning the conflict to begin with than it is about making your opponent have to work around the breaking of the province itself. So I'm not sure how they plan on doing that, you know, how they plan on working that in going forward, but it should be noted that, you know, because of the way that Art of Peace functions, I think you can work around it a little bit better than you can Mori Kuroi.
Yeah, I mean, first off, it's never going to be on the Stronghold, so you could just not attack into it. It could be the one province you don't break. But if you have a bunch of strongholds, or a bunch of provinces, that is, that you don't want to attack, then that's where it sings. And that's why I'm really excited to see some more of the neutral provinces, because if we have a couple of other provinces that I don't want to attack to as much as Shameful Display, then suddenly you have to pick, like, these really annoying provinces to attack. And that's when things like the Art of Peace will really, really shine.
Rumors about Ancestral lands continue to swirl.
Yeah, Ancestral Lands being a province that we see as 5 strength base, and from what we can tell, appears to give even more strength in political conflict. The amount of that is up for much heated debate.
It's either 1, 3, or 5. No one is sure.
I'm on the boat of 1 because I have analyzed the pixels and I think it's 1. Also, I think it's like 4 pixels, and if you can read a number in there definitively and with as much surety as some people can, then I think you have better things to do. You could use those talents really, really somewhere else. But yeah, I think that's another one. I think a lot of neutral provinces will be really strong, and if a lot of them have bite, like Shameful Display and Art of Peace do, then that'll be really, really fun. So let's move on to the next card. I believe, Dan, you got this one. The first conflict character, or not conflict, sorry, dynasty character of the Green Clan.
Yes, so this is a dynasty character. This is Asahina Artisan. It costs 1 fate, 0 military skill, 0 political skill, 2 glory, Shugenja air traits, and it has an action. During a conflict, bow this character. Choose another Crane character. That character gets +3 political skill until the end of the conflict. I think this is just a good 1-cost card, and the 2 glory means that it's either you can honor it and make it strong, or you can leave it up because you didn't need to use a political buff for that turn, and that actually counts for Imperial favor.
Yeah, that 2 glory for Imperial favor is so nice. Additionally, this is another one of those 0 strength guys you can just throw into your breaking of the Art of Peace, and then get a 1-cost 2-stat character out of it, assuming you put Fate on your Artisan. And of the 1 costs, I think this is the one I'm most likely to put Fate on, just because it's sort of like it's always there. Your opponent always has to play around the fact that you can always pump something up by 3 strength, and bonus political strength is something we haven't really seen in this game. It seems like a lot of cards don't really deal with that. Like we have bonsai and katanas for military strength. So bonus political strength is rare, and bonus political strength as an action for free on your little 1-cost chud. And that's fantastic.
The weirdest part is I actually feel like this is a character that you're gonna not only play 3 of, but actually might put some fate on just to leave out for the sake of it just being so versatile. Like you can the fact that you can bow it for the sake of the 3, and that's where the 3 political skill comes from, means that you can literally have it anywhere on the board. So you can send it to, if you need to send it to a conflict against, say a Crane Mirror or something, to stop your characters from being alone and being able to be dueled off the map or whatever. You can do that, but you can also just leave it in your pool indefinitely and still get value out of it. So I feel like the more of the value from this card just comes from the fact that it's very versatile, and your opponent has to play around not only the fact that you can bow for 3 political strength, but the fact that it's literally just a dude on the board. The fact that they have to deal with 1 extra person that can still get value even if it's not doing anything.
Yeah, and if they just play around it and they say, all right, we're not going to defend your political conflict as heavily, so you don't use the artisan, it's still a character you can just chud into a military conflict early game. I've had several games early on where like just throwing your 0 strength military, and then like I suppose like with the recent ruling, you can't do this anymore. But what I would do is just throw it in just to grab a free ring after they've like bowed out their guys. But that can't be done anymore. So now you have, in order to do that, you need to have either a katana or some other way to boost its strength, so that it actually can win the conflict by 1 strength, which I think is a good ruling to have. But still, I mean, hey, it happened. I had an Asahina Artisan take the final Stronghold for the win in one of my games. Yep. It was pretty glorious, and it was something. I think it was like I put like a katana, 2 bonsais, and then honored it, and it was like an 8 strength Asahina Artisan, and it won the game. It was pretty sweet. So don't underestimate your little 1-cost guys. They're still scary.
This almost seems like a 2 fate level ability, but it's a 1 fate character. It's fantastic. But like you guys said, you're pretty much going to overinvest on this, I think, in most scenarios, just because of how versatile that ability is. It works around the Crane Stronghold too, right? If you buff someone's political past 2.
Yeah. Now, granted, you can only do that in a conflict, so like it only works when you're defending against Crane. So like if you're attacking and your guy only has 2 strength, they can just use their Stronghold first because they're a defending player. But if you're defending and you only have a 2 strength guy and they're going to use their Stronghold to value, then you can buff up his strength prematurely. I think another reason to keep this guy around this girl around for 1 more turn is because she has 2 glory. So if you do land an honor on her, then she does become a actually like really nice character on her own, who is able to actually like pull out punches, and you maybe don't keep her back. One final thing about this character, I'm not sure if it was mentioned, but she has the Shugenja trait, and that's good. Shugenja trait is very good from what we've seen so far, because it allows you to play Cloud the Mind, which is basically this game's version of Milk the Poppy. And
very relevant.
It's very relevant to blank text boxes, especially with some of these characters we've been seeing where their text boxes are absolutely ginormous effects.
Incidentally, I mean, overall, this card just seems like a huge like 3-cost staple. Like I see absolutely nothing wrong with this. The fact that it is, a Shugenja with 2 honor or with 2 glory and has a really good ability that allows it to be useful at any point on the board. I see absolutely 0 reason not to. Their clan, and that this is just like a one-off for Crane, because it looks kind of insane. I'll be honest. Like even from playtesting, yes. It's very, very good.
Yeah, I think it's a solid 1-drop. It's a step above the staple 3 stat 1-drops we've seen from Lion and Crane, which makes it good from what we've seen so far. That makes it very good. So let's go on to the next card. Speaking of staple 1-drops here. The next card is Doji Whisperer, which is a 1-cost, 0 military, 3 political skill courtier with 1 glory. So there's not really a lot to say about this card. There's no special effect on it. It's just kind of a vanilla stat stick. It's 3 political skill for 1 fate, and that's fine. That's a really nice, solid return on investment for a political conflict. 1 fate for 3 strength. I'm in.
It is literally worse Asahina Artisan. It is Asahina Artisan without the versatility of Asahina Artisan.
You say that, but yeah, Asahina Artisan has the versatility of you don't need to commit the 3 strength. However, Asahina Artisan isn't a separate character all its own, so if the character you buff with Asahina Artisan is bowed by an effect, then you've effectively bowed 2 characters worth of strength with Asahina Artisan. So
yeah.
this spreads it out a little more. And again, against Crane, 3 political skills to the breakpoint. And we talked about how hard it is to do it, and this is the 1 drop that does it.
Also, courtier trait, which is important.
Courtier trait's very good for a lot of the control effects we've seen so far, especially for Shane. So, just having courtiers, it seems to be what Crane does. Have courtiers, bow people, win political conflicts. It just fits right in. It'll probably be at 3 times for now. I imagine as newer 1-drops come out in the Saga packs, we may no longer see this. It might start getting replaced with better 1-drops that come out, but for now, it's a perfectly fine 1-drop. It'll probably be in every Crane deck as of 3 times.
You don't feel bad about replacing it either. It's not like it's overly powerful that you're like going to miss it, but it's at a decent power level to where you're glad that you have it. I mean, decks need those.
Yeah, it's just it's a solid character. And again, it's so vanilla that there's not a lot to talk about here other than its vanillaness. It's about as vanilla gets. So
I do want to go off on a little bit of a tangent too, and mention the fact that traits are like the fact that we've only seen 2 or 3 cards with traits. I'm wondering if perhaps FFG is trying to kind of go the like Yu-Gi-Oh! Pokemon route where building decks around certain traits is going to become important at some point in time. I'm not actually positive if that's going to be the case or if it's just going to be kind of a few cards here or there, but just something to consider going forward as they start revealing more cards and like more effects.
There will likely be, I think, the 3 main traits that they're going to be keying off of, and you'll want to look out for are going to be Shugenja, Courtier, and Bushi. So keep an eye out for those. Those are the 3 main archetypes of characters in the L5R universe. So being a courtier, definitely not bad. Whether or not we see a bunch of things that make you want to make an all courtier deck in the future is yet to be seen. Still, it's very Crane. It allows you to play those really sweet courtier cards that we've seen so far, and there's probably more to come that makes it even better. So let's move on because there's not really much else to say.
Alright, cool. I get Brash Samurai, this mess of a picture that we have, but I think I can make it out. Brash Samurai is a 2 fate, 2 military, 1 political skill with 2 glory. He is a Bushi trait, and in my loose interpretation, which is to say, I'm going to try and read this. The action that it has is while this character is your only participating character in a conflict, you honor him. I actually have a question about this because we were playing that it just honors forever, but is there a possibility that this is only honored during the conflict in which it is participating as the only character?
No, it is permanently honored.
It is
honored
confirmed?
This character.
Okay.
I won't say it's confirmed. I think it's pretty clear in the wording. You honored this character, it gains the honored status. It doesn't say. It doesn't say.
I believe that was the case, yeah, but I was like, there's some chance that that's not the case just because of the way it is worded. But I mean, in general, this just seems like a pretty standard character with a good ability. It has good stats. It ends up when it's when it's honored, or which is going to happen preferably through its ability. It ends up being a 4/3, which is pretty good stat line, especially for a 2 fate character. But I do feel that it's going to be played a lot early on, but I very much believe that this is going to be a character that gets replaced later on due to the fact that having solo characters in fights, even as Crane, can be very dangerous sometimes.
I am not sure I agree entirely.
This card is really strong.
Nuts. I think this card's nuts. It's one of even if you just view it as a stat stick, it's almost a guaranteed 2-cost 4/3. Yeah, it has the caveat of it has to be attacking alone, but in the early game, that's not hard to pull off. In the mid game, that's not that's still not hard to pull off. It's only when board states get ridiculous, and I'm not entirely sure they will, that this might be a less good character. But I am never unhappy to see Brash Samurai my flop because I get a 4/3 for 2, and then when he leaves, I gain an honor. He's extremely resilient to dishonor as well, because if you dishonor, even if you remove his honor status, say he honors the first turn you play him, and the next turn he's out, you can just re-honor again. So if you ever have like a Scorpion player that like says you choose and dishonor one of your guys, you just dishonor your Brash Samurai, and next turn he re-honors, and you don't care.
This is true. I guess it is kind of dishonor insurance, but I don't know. It's really good as a stat stick, but at the same time, it looks like Crane is going to have a lot of cards that help you honor characters, and they have a lot of cards that are, very good glory to just boost stats. So I'm not particularly sure how this is going to size up once we know all of the cards for every faction and all the the way that Crane works. Like I said, I think it's going to be very strong in the core set, but I feel like because of the way that Crane focuses heavily on like honoring characters and getting them out, he might eventually phase out as we get done more like 1 and 2 stat or more 1 and 2 fate characters that have decent glory values that can just replace him and be honored in some other way.
Again, I disagree, but just because this is one of those Crane honor effects. This is one of their consistent ways to get an honored character on the board. So until there's so many honor effects in Crane that they actually don't need Brash Samurai, which I think is a long ways off, this guy's going to be 3 times in every Crane deck for a while, especially because he's a military guy. He's got stronger military than political, and that makes him automatically worth consideration for a heavy political deck.
Yeah, I think self-honoring effects are really strong, and his stats are obviously insane. And you can either drop him on 1 turn for 2 fate, and you're going to get good value out of him, or if you keep him around for an extra turn, right, and he's honored, then you can swing in with him and multiple people, and you don't have to worry about having to honor again, right? So, yeah.
Like I said, this guy is a mulligan for in your opening flop, I think, every time. If you can get him with 1 fate on him, and then let's say you have 7 opening fate. I like to spend 6 of my fate, but if I had to spend all 7, I'd choose a Brash Samurai with a fate, a 1-drop, and then another 2-drop with a fate, probably Narishma. And that's a really good ideal start.
I don't know, maybe that's just me misinterpreting things, but it feels like he's a heavy fate. He's a pretty heavy fate investment if you really want to get value out of his ability. Again, I still think he's really good early in the game, but I don't know, I feel like at some point he's going to become less good based on the fact that he's such a heavy fate investment if you want to actually get value. But maybe that's just me.
I don't
Could
think
he
he's
fall
that
off
heavy.
a little bit in the late game?
I think if boards start getting big to the point that conflicts can't be attacked or defended with just one character, that's when he really doesn't work. That only really happens when a game is winding down. And like I said, this is the card you want to see in your opening flop. If you see it baseline, you keep it there. Otherwise, you probably throw away stuff to try and get him in there. Early game, this card is just absolutely nuts. You can attack with the Fire Ring, and then a play I did that I think is actually going to be one of my favorite plays that I'm going to try to do every opportunity I get, is to play a Brash Samurai with no fate, send him in alone on a fire attack, honor him, and then dishonor an opponent's character that they probably put fate on, and then play Noble Sacrifice. To getting rid of your Brash Samurai, gaining you an honor, your opponent loses their most invested character, and then they lose an honor as well. It's just a great
Strong.
way to... Yeah, it's strong. He's a perfect Noble Sacrifice target. And you know what? That makes some good fluff. He's so brash, he just goes in there and then he sacrifices himself to kill somebody. Seems good. And that's one of the few hard removal effects Crane has. So I think if you can land that, if you land a Dishonor an enemy character and you have a Brash Samurai, suddenly that becomes real deal. Real quick. Pocket honoring is very good in the Crane clan, as it turns out. But we'll see. We could always be wrong. I actually should put this as a disclaimer before we started this segment, but this is just opinions. Don't take it as fact. I assume most people out there know that already, but in case you didn't, there you go.
As it turns out, when you analyze cards for a card game that you only have 20 or 30 cards of, and nobody's really played that many games of, you tend to be wrong more often than not.
Well, it's a good thing.
Wild speculation.
Yeah, I wouldn't call it wild, but it's a good thing that most of us have played competitive card games. Myself doing Netrunner, Thrones, and Conquest. Gentry mostly being Conquest, and you mentioning you did Netrunner. So
And Yu-Gi-Oh for what that's worth to the community out here.
I think you probably shouldn't mention that in public. Are you sure you're okay with that stain on
I
your life?
I mean, I'll be okay with that because I gave it up. I was smart enough to give it up at some point, a few years back before it got ridiculous. So I don't feel too bad about it, I guess.
That's fair. Just as much competitive card game experience. So we can say that we're not basing this just off of wild
Right.
theories. Yeah, we have some experience here. All right, let's move on to the next card. This card's a fun one. Why don't you take it away, Dan?
All right. I feel bad because you kind of wanted to do this, but
Oh, this guy.
Doji Gift Giver. It's a 2-cost character, 0 military skill, 2 political, 1 glory. It has the courtier trait, and it has an action. While this character is participating in a conflict, give your opponent 1 fate. That opponent must choose a ready participating character he or she controls. Bow that character. This ability is really strong.
Yeah. So like Brash Samurai, I mentioned being really good in the early game, and not so great as the game goes on, and we have more and more characters participating in big conflicts to try and finish off that last province, or to win that air ring and win the game with honor. Doji Gift Giver is kind of like the inverse of that. This card is, in my opinion, one of the best 2-drop characters to have in the late game. Period. End of discussion. It's just paying a fate when it's the last turn of the game doesn't really matter. Your opponent might play an event, but bowing a character, especially with all your other bow effects kind of accumulate with this card. So if you bow something with your Stronghold, and then you play for shame with a Steward of Law in play, and they have to bow something else, and then they only have like 1 or 2 big characters left, they have to choose one of them, and then you give them a fate to bow a really impactful character.
Yeah, and I think 100% the reason that this ends up being so good is solely because it has no restrictions on the bow. You just bow a character. Like almost every single bow effect that we've seen, other than this card, specifically states that it has to have under 2 political skill, or has to be dishonored, or you have to have an honored character in the fight, or something like that. But like Doji Gift Giver just says bow a character.
Your opponent gets to choose is the restriction on it.
It is. Your opponent does get to choose, but I feel like Crane has a lot of control effects, and that you can kind of get it to a point where you can bow the character that you want if you really need to.
Kind of, yes. Like I said,
Like
it's
this
hard to play
upgrade.
around. I think it's just a card that you have in the late game as an additional bow in that final push for the final province or that final ring trigger with Hotaru. Whatever you need to do to win the game, it's going to eventually come down to some big swing, and then this card just makes it that much harder to defend. That's it. I wouldn't really consider it a 2-cost character. I don't necessarily play it that often early game, just because giving my opponent the fate that early on in the game can be a big deal. When board states are small, things can swing a lot more quickly with like a single event or a single ambush character. So I don't like playing this early game, but late game, it's a good card.
Yeah, admittedly, I think
drop
this is a
late
card
game,
that
right?
you.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah. I think admittedly this is a card that you like really only want to see one of ever, and only really want to play it when you have to. But it is powerful when it is useful.
Yeah, it's a situational 2-drop, and that's fine. Because like the nice thing about a 2-drop character is if you draw it early, you have the option to play it if you need to, rather than a high impact situational character where you can't play it because it costs too much.
Yeah, and I think it functions a little bit more like a 3-drop because you want to trigger that bow ability in the late game. But like you said, it doesn't really matter if that's the last turn of the game, for the most part.
Yeah. We haven't seen all the events yet, so it could matter against certain things. I don't imagine you want to give Scorpion a fate, but most clans probably don't have that many events where the one fate is going to make or break the game.
You might might not want to turn on blackmail, maybe. Who knows?
Yeah, I think Scorpion's going to be the one you maybe hesitate a bit, because if they already have one fate and you give them 2, then suddenly that could lead to a bunch of stuff. Because it looks like Scorpion has a bunch of expensive events that are very swingy and change the game immensely. Yeah, Doji Gift Giver. I'm going to call this card Grandma basically every single time I play it on the board. because I don't know, it's just a nice old lady and she's giving you gifts. Like, it's fine. It's just grandma.
She's just this is the aesthetic fluff. She's just your grandma shows up and you're like, well, how do I fight? My grandma's here. I can't argue with you. I can't fight. Like,
Yeah.
that would just be not in front of my grandma. That's wrong.
Yeah. I mean, like, there's always the thing that, like, if you throw her into a military conflict and, like, you have, like, if you can honor her and get her 1 military strength, or you give her a katana, then suddenly grandma can go into a military conflict and your opponent has to spend 2 people to defend it. It's kind of jank, but it amuses me immensely that grandma just, like, can walk in and 1v1 anybody in a military conflict just because she bows them. So, it's fun. It's cool. Grandma has a special place in my heart. It's good art, too. I like the art. So let's move on to the coolest Crane 2-drop outside of Brash Samurai, I guess. It's kind of a toss-up for me between Brash Samurai and this card. This card is Savvy Politician. Hoo boy. So we mentioned Crane like to honor their characters, and Savvy Politician sort of multiplies their honoring ability. So Savvy Politician is a 2-cost character with 1 military skill, 2 political skill, the courtier trait, 1 glory, and text that reads, reaction. After this character is honored, choose a character and honor that character. So whenever you get an honor effect that you get to choose the character you are honoring, you can honor your Savvy Politician basically for free. So you get an extra honored character and an extra 1/1 of stats whenever you would basically have a targeted honor effect. Assuming you would target the character that Savvy Politician is targeting otherwise if you didn't have it. So how good is this? I think it's pretty solid. I don't think I'm super blown away by it. But if you're going for the honor victory, having that extra honor and that extra stats for defending your provinces is a must-have, I think. So I think she'll see 3x. I forgot to mention that maybe Grandma might only see like a 1 or a 2 times include, 3 if you really need the 2-cost card. Because she's super situational. This card doesn't seem situational. It seems you're going to have a lot of honor effects. You always have the fire ring available to you. So whenever this card hits the board, you're probably going to be able to hit it off and trigger that effect.
I'm going to make maybe a controversial statement, but am I allowed to call this card bad?
Yeah,
I feel like this card may not be as good as people think it is. Like, you do get a free honor, and it kind of effectively ends up being a 2 fate 2/3, and it might be good it might be worth playing in the core set just because of lack of quality cards. But like, it just seems very underwhelming. The effect to honor a second character basically just means that you're honoring her for free, like you said, but all that really does is give you an extra 1/1 of stats on an already kind of average card, and I feel like it might be taken up by better. I feel like the slot might be worth putting in something else if we get like good neutral, any like decent neutrals, or literally anything from Crane that has like a couple of glory for an honor victory, or has like a couple of better stat lines or something.
I see where you're coming from. The stats it gives are underwhelming. I think where this card shines is the honor it gives you for free. It's effectively gained an honor, assuming it leaves play honored. Which this is a card I probably don't put Fate on, and I only play if I have an effect to honor a character. And there's always the fire ring again. So I feel like this card is a 2-cost character that gives you decent stats, and when it leaves play, gains you an honor. So if you're going for an honor victory, which I think Crane should probably keep on the table, especially out of the core set, this card we'll see 3 times, period. And if there's ever a time in the future where Crane kind of branches off into like a political, like a conflict deck, where it tries to break 4 provinces, or an honor control deck, this will be in the honor control deck unless we see like a huge number of cards that give you honor much more than this card does.
Again, courtier trait is relevant.
Go ahead.
Sorry. So I was going to say, again, courtier trait is relevant because it turns on cards. I'm more in the middle between you guys. I think it's nice. I don't know if it's fantastic. Comparing to the other 2-drops that Crane has, I think you'd rank Brash Samurai and then Gift Giver and then Politician in my mind. They're all obviously still good cards, but I think this is one you might want to replace sooner, assuming you can get a good 2-drop effect in there that's on the level as getting the Honor Cascade, which is good. Don't get me wrong. I mean, multiplying your Honor effect or multiplying Way of the Crane is great, but I don't know relative to what else we might see how that's going to hold up.
Yeah, and there may be like a neutral event or something that honors characters relatively easily. Obviously, it won't be as good as Way of the Crane, which we'll get to, but like if there's more ways to honor characters, there's more ways for this card to go off, the better it is. Just because I think the one thing this card, the one problematic part about this card is it's a combo card. You need something else to combo it with to honor it, and then honor something else. And if you don't see your Way of the Crane, or you don't see, like, you don't win the fire ring, or your opponent goes first and wins the fire ring, then this card just is bad. It's just bad. It only becomes, like, above par when you get that honor effect, and that's why you play this card. So I think you play this card if you're going for an honor victory, and you have ways to honor your characters and get that extra honor on it.
I'm just gonna come out and say it now. If this card ends up being good enough that I have to play more than one of it in a Crane deck in order to make the deck viable out of the core set, I'm just gonna not play Crane. I think. I actually dislike this card that much. I actually think this card is that bad, but that's maybe a little extreme.
I was not expecting Savvy Politician of all cards to be the binary one. Ooh, man.
I know, but man,
that seems very hyperbolic for me, man. But I guess like if you feel that strongly about it, that's your due. That's your deal.
Well, its fate to stat ratio isn't good, right? If we're looking at
really
one
not.
fate buying you 3 of a skill, then this is 3 combined skill, which is a little bit iffy, right?
Yeah, the you're paying the extra fate here, so like you can think of it as a 3 skill for 1 fate, assuming no null skills. So you get your 1 fate worth of stats, and the other fate goes towards the duplicate, goes towards the extra honor you gain, as well as the 1/1 you get for this character being honored. And that's where that's what I said. It's like such a bad card if you can't honor it, and if you do honor it, it's suddenly fine. It's suddenly like an on par card on its own, but it gets you an additional honor when it leaves play. We're still not entirely sure how much to value honor, but I think if your victory is an honor victory, you should value it pretty highly. So it strikes me as an honor victory card. If you want to have your deck be a switch deck that has the option of going to an honor victory, you probably run this card until better options show up. Or if better options show up.
Oh, they will. I'm confident in that.
I think if it had 2 glory, it would be a lot better.
Oh, if it was 2 glory, I would be all over this card. This card would be so good.
Oh, don't get me
I
wrong.
would
Yeah,
love
if
this
it had
card.
2 glory, it actually would be way better. It actually I wouldn't consider it amazing, but it would actually be like above average for sure, at least. But that 1 glory just makes it so bad.
Yeah. Again, I think it's like a middling upper 2-drop. It's above average, I think, for what a 2-drop should be. And so far, I guess maybe it is just average, but what I would consider a 2-drop to be, this is slightly above. But then again, every 2-drop we've seen seems to be above what I would consider a good 2-drop. So maybe that's just it in this game. Is that maybe it's just bad for a 2-drop. So let's move on to our last 2-drop for the Crane that we've seen so far. We do have one Scout card that we don't have any sort of information on, but we do know it exists from the showcase page. But let's move on to the last 2-drop we know. I believe this is Gentry.
It is. So this character is Daidoji Harishima.
Harishima.
He is a
That's
oh,
an
that's
N.
an N. You are correct. I've been saying an H the whole time. It's okay. I'm gonna continue saying an H because that looks like a freaking H. That N, the line in the middle is going the wrong way. Anyway, this is a 2 fate, 3 military skill, 1 political skill, 1 glory character. He is both a bushi and a scout. And his action states: choose a face-down card in one of your provinces, turn that card face up. And honestly, I'm gonna make the argument that this is one of the reasons that Savvy Politician is bad. Just baseline stats. If you look at it, like honestly, I think Savvy Politician is maybe okay for an honor deck. Like just stating, a thing that you said before. It does make sense in an honor deck at least, and I could see playing it. But like Daidoji Narishima is the same stat line +1 base, -1 if you honor the savvy politician, I guess, and the Narishma doesn't get honored as well, but he also has an additional effect on top of that, which is admittedly maybe not super strong, but it is kind of pseudo card draw.
It's like having an extra province that turn.
Yeah, effectively, yes.
At the cost of delaying your Dynasty phase, which you may or may not want to do. Considering the first player to pass gains a fate. So I'm kind of like, I like Narishma a lot from a control perspective. He gives you options. You get to like buy something cheap, flip over a card. He allows you to dig deeper for your extra copies of uniques, and that can get you basically free fate. The downside to Narishma is that, again, you're delaying your Dynasty phase, so your opponent's going to probably get a free fate by just finishing before you.
Admittedly,
That's a
though,
trade-off.
We talked about on the last podcast we played, Conquest together pretty heavily, and like one of the biggest things in Conquest was deploy stalling. So like, I understand that they've added in the one fate mechanic into this game, but I feel like there's still a lot of decks that are going to want to wait as long as possible to play cards because they know that they're not going to outspeed their opponents by a huge margin anyway, and they're not worried about the one fate. So the longer that you can stall out, the better position you have going forward. You can see more of the board state to make decisions on, and I feel like Crane may be one of the factions that can kind of work with that a little bit better than other ones. So it might be useful just for that fact, but like otherwise it is still one card draw. It's a decent stat line. It's not amazing, but it is military skill and Crane, which is nice to note because they seem to be pretty lacking in military skills. So I think regardless, you're going to have to run this card just for the sake of keeping some military strength, so you don't just break all of your provinces early.
I think him being a unique is really relevant as well, because you can generate that extra fate for the unique discards if you flip more of him, which can be good. That's just value.
Yeah. The downside to uniques being you can't have more than one of each in play. So, but while Narishma's effect would scale with multiple copies of him in play if you could do that, I'm not entirely sure you want more than one of this type of effect typically anyways, because then like you're really, really hurting your delay, and you're basically giving your opponent a free fate every turn. Narishma strikes me as a character I'd probably put one fate on typically, just because his ability is decent enough that I probably want to use it twice without investing too much fate in him. I'd obviously want to use it every turn, but I don't think I want to keep a 3/1 2-cost character around. That's a lot of fate to put in up front.
Obviously, you discard for extra fate, right, if that showed up, because you're getting 2 fate worth of value. But, I mean, as far as the initial investment goes, you're paying 3, I think, in most cases regardless, right?
Yeah, and, if you keep him around a second turn, you increase the chances of flipping him again. So you might get him around for a third turn just kind of for free off of his ability. And if you have a lot of uniques in play, he becomes a lot better just because you're able to dig deep for copies of uniques that are basically just free discards and getting fate. And that's never a bad thing. So yeah, he's a very solid unique. Looking at, I think he's one of 4 uniques Crane have that we've seen. He's a very solid starter to the unique package that Crane have. I'm not entirely sure. I'm really tempted to say that unique characters are straight up better than non-unique characters. But I suppose that really varies based on the effect of the unique character. But the ones we've seen so far, I don't know if I don't know. It's hard to say.
I mean, I think that's a pretty fair assessment. So far, most of the unique characters seem to have a little bit better stat lines and significantly better abilities than most of the non-uniques.
Yeah, and I think they probably put the good abilities on unique characters just because they don't want you to have multiple copies of that ability in play.
Precisely.
We're going to get to Kakita Asami in a couple of rounds here, and if you had multiple of her in play, that's ridiculous. So that's all there is to really say about Narishma. He's a solid military guy. Military guys are good in a political faction. That's going to be weak in military, and his ability is pretty solid.
Yeah, it's like a line ability in Crane.
Yeah, it's good. It gives them more options. And maybe in the future when we have a ton of unique characters, he could just be ridiculous. Like, he could potentially just be like one of those characters that like really creates an engine of like fate. So, yeah. It'll be fun. You're going to play him. He's probably going to be a 3 times in most decks out of the core. We say that about a lot of things, but like we don't have all the information yet. But I think even if in a world where we have all the cards, Nourishment is probably one of the cards you strongly consider putting 3 of. Uniques kind of scale with more copies of themselves. So you want as many copies of a single unique as you can. Moving on to the next one. I think this is yours, Dan. One of my favorite cards.
This is another really strong military character for Crane. So this is Doji Challenger. It's a 3 fate character with 3 military skill, 3 political skill, the Bushi and Duelist traits, and it has 2 glory. And the action, while this character is attacking, choose a character controlled by your opponent. Move that character to this conflict. So this is a harpoon effect that is obviously very relevant given the null skill value ruling.
Yeah. Oh, man. If you pull in a character with a null skill value into their null conflict, they automatically bow and go home, if you guys do not know the ruling of that. This also, I believe this will also work for characters that are pacified with the Pacifism Phoenix card. And that says it cannot participate in military conflicts. If you pull them in with Doji Challenger, they will immediately bow and go home because they cannot participate in military conflicts. You pull them in, and then they immediately leave. So that just adds more control to Crane. It forces your opponent to sort of, I mean, you can just put your opponent in an awkward situation. The main caveat to this card is it only triggers while attacking.
Yeah, I freaking love this card. Let me just say that. I think that's the way pacifism works with this as well. That's the way that I've read into it anyway, and what seems to be the consensus from what I've seen is that if a pacified character is dragged into a conflict it can't technically participate in, it is just sent home like a null character. But it really is good for just getting rid of really tough characters that you don't have any other way to deal with, so that you can break a province later. You don't have to worry about it getting attacking in a follow-up attack, and it is fantastic. It sucks that it's so much fate value, but I understand why. And one of the biggest things that I've seen it used for, and it's not as good against Crane, I don't think, as like maybe some of the other clans will be, just because of the way the Crane clan champion works. But I completely believe that this is going to be the card that's used to combat clan champions and just get them out of the way as fast as possible.
Yeah, especially if you have a very like unary kind of champion who's only good in one conflict, like Otaru, only really good in a political conflict. That's like where she shines. If you pull her into a military, she's suddenly a lot worse, especially for the investment you put into a character like Otaru. So strong card, 2 glory is great.
Stats are good for 3.
Oh my god, the stats are amazing for 3. They're about right. It's a strong character. It's amazing. The effect is so versatile.
I don't know if the stats are amazing for 3, but they're not bad. The 2 glory is
from
the
what
thing
we've
that makes
seen
it
so far,
actually playable.
6 stats for 3 is about right, about on par from what we've seen so far.
Yeah, like I said, it doesn't seem bad, but it's not impressive by any means.
It's not like over the top. No, it's just soft. Like if it was a 2/2, then it's a little bit less flexible, right? Because then it's a little bit more susceptible to like the Crane Stronghold effect, right? This is outside of that range.
Yeah, admittedly, this is outside of the range for several cards. There's a lot of cards where 2 seems to be the threshold. From what I've said, there's like a couple of cards rather where 2 seems to be the threshold. So that is nice that it is just outside of that.
Yeah, a lot of those cards key off of cost. I think Assassinate as well as Blackmail both require cost 2 or less. So this card is just outside of that threshold. It's also nice and worth noting that a lot of the Crane cards that deal with military, which I think is decidedly their weaker side, are cheaper and not expensive. So, A+ for that. Your weak side is cheap to sort of shore up. And this is definitely one of the better characters for a military conflict. And if you get it into a situation where your opponent is already sort of like overcommitted to defending against you, you can just make them commit more and like sort of, you can kind of view this as like you might lose the conflict, but you bow an additional opponent's character for doing so. So it could be pretty sweet. So So let's move on to the next card, our second unique character. This is Kakita Asami. So Asami is another one of those characters that really, really fits into that honor gain deck. The one who wants to go for the honor victory or perhaps be a switch deck. So she's a 3-cost unique character with 1 military skill, 3 political skill, the courtier trait, 2 glory, and an effect which reads action. While this character is participating in a political conflict, if you count more political skill in the conflict than your opponent, take 1 honor from that opponent. So not only does she gain you honor, she denies an honor from your opponent. So Asami strikes me as a very annoying card for very specific factions to deal with. If you cannot compete in politics, she will just take an honor. And if you're already like a low honor deck or you're drawing lots of cards, she can kind of slowly, incrementally build up that advantage over a couple of turns. And yeah.
Let me state too that this is an action that you activate in the middle of the phase, and it is current political skill. So it is very possible as the initiating player to just make sure that you throw enough skill into a check that your opponent cannot possibly prevent you from getting this action off. That's very nice. So you don't have to worry. You don't have to worry about winning the conflict so much as if this is the effect that you're worried about getting off at least. As so much as just making sure that you have enough initial skill. And like the other thing too is like the stat line is bad, admittedly. So I don't know that this is going to be terribly useful for anything that isn't very heavily honor based, like honor victory based. But it is very useful in that the effect is written the way that it is. I think. I believe
certainly a card that goes into an honor deck, and out of the core set, Crane are probably going to have a little bit of a switch deck going on just because of the sort of binary nature. They have the ability to break provinces, and they also have a lot of honor gain. So they'll probably have the option of going for either victory condition depending on how the game plays out. And she helps a lot more if you're going for the honor one than the breaking provinces one. Although to say 3 political skill is not that bad, especially with 2 glory.
In a way, her ability is sort of like stealing a card from your opponent, right? Because you're taking an honor that then they can't spend on a future bid, potentially, and assuming you're playing Crane, I think in the games I've watched of yours, Travis, you were typically going maybe 2-3. So if you're slowly bleeding your opponent over the course of the game, that just sort of adds up, right?
Yeah, and against aggressive decks, you might even change that up a little bit. Like if an aggressive deck is drawing like 5 for a turn or 2, and you already drained them like 4 honor of their starting, and then you have like Asami, you can, and a couple of other stuff, you can actually start to slowly, very quickly accumulate honor. Because you start with 11, you only need to get 14 to win from there. So Asami helps it out. She's a character you probably put 1, sometimes 2 fade on. I'm always hesitant to put 2 fade on a character just because of how certain effects could discard that character. Not going to name any specifics, but there's quite a few of them that could really hurt that. And so, but she's one of those characters that definitely builds an incremental advantage over time. She's a character you definitely want to stick around a couple turns. It's really great if you flip over multiple copies of her, so that you can get her around for multiple turns without really committing the fate to do it. Because like, I don't know, like if you spent 5 fate and you kept her around all 3 turns with the 5 fate that you've spent on her, and you gained 3 total honor off of her and denied your opponent 3 honor, that's actually quite a big swing. It's slow, it's incremental, but it's significant if you ignore it.
6 honor swing for 5 fate?
Yeah. That's pretty ridiculous, and it's another one of those ways that Crane have to generate honor tokens, and that makes the honor victory an actual sort of win condition that you need to watch out for against Crane. So yeah. She's not as flashy as Narishma. I mean, Narishma is a little bit more playable than she is, but she'll be in her specific decks as decks become more refined, and then she'll be good in those decks.
She's gonna be a good card that I think is gonna be annoying to play against, right? Like you're sitting across the table from that, and you're like, oh my god, I'm gonna get bled over the next X turns, right?
Yeah, especially if you're weak if you're like low honor and weak in politics. So like against Crab, Unicorn. Even though like Scorpion is probably going to have good politics, this is probably like a really annoying card for Scorpion to deal with, Because they kind of want to balance being low honor, but not being too low honor. And I imagine they start off with one of the lowest honors in the game because they're the Scorpion clan. So theoretically, she could potentially really, really punch a hole in their game plan. We'll see.
Yeah,
I like the
think
art,
we
though.
can move on.
It's reused art,
Yeah,
but
the
it's
art
great
is
art.
the art is great. That one I'll admit. But yeah, I think we can move on. Yeah.
All right, it's your card.
All right. So next one is Kakita Kaizen. He is a 3 fate, 3 military, 2 political strength with 2 glory. He is a Bushi, duelist, and Kenshinzen, which is something that we haven't seen on any other card that I know of, at least not up to this point. His action states, while this character is participating in a conflict, your opponent must choose a participating character he or she controls, challenge that character to a military duel. If this character wins, move each character not involved in the duel home. If it loses, send it home.
So explain to us how duels work, Gentry.
Alright, so duels are effectively, it's what it sounds like. It is a one-on-one battle between 2 different characters in a conflict. Oftentimes, the duels are chosen by the person initiating the duel, but in this case, obviously, the opponent gets to choose which character is participating. And it works kind of similar to the way that drawing cards works, in that you are legitimately bidding honor to determine extra strength added on to whichever type of duel it is, whether it be a military or a political duel, with the person bidding more honor, giving the additional honor that they bid to the person that bid less. So generally, I found that duels end up having very strong effects, but obviously they have very high potential to backfire if something goes wrong. If you miscalculate on honor, or you just don't have the honor to spend on them, or something along those lines. If you're the initiator, and of course if you're getting initiated to a duel on, you're probably going to lose it if it's set up correctly, if the person's paying attention to what is on the board. And this particular effect seems very strong. It is unfortunate that it's a military challenge, being that it is, Crane is not a very high military deck, and it does only have 3 military skill, which is relatively average for a 3 fate character, I believe. But if you do manage to get this effect on, everything that's not participating in the duel goes home. And of course, the person, something I forgot to mention, I believe, is the person losing the duel, I believe, gets bowed automatically. So, generally. So, at least from what I understand, unless I've misinterpreted something. But
I don't know if the loser necessarily gets bowed. We know that on another card that's coming up, Duelist Training. But here, it seems to indicate that basically it's just going to be Kakita Kaizen and whoever he fought with in the same conflict after that, which is good for other reasons. Obviously, you turn on Admit Defeat, which we'll see later, and maybe you turn on some other bow effects, so that way you've eliminated their character, which is good.
Yeah, it does seem a little dangerous. Like, I feel like it's going to be tough to use because your opponent gets to choose the duel target as well. So you are going to have to be very careful about who they're sending in and what you have sitting on the board at the time. I feel like this is going to be a character where if you're going to play it and get particular value out of it, you're probably going to have to buff it up a little bit. You're probably going to have to make sure that you have at least 1 or 2 tricks to throw onto it in case the duel goes horribly wrong. But it does seem fairly strong for what it is. And at the very least, if you're winning the duel, at the very worst, you're not going to get the province broken, I don't think. It's very hard to lose, to have a province get broken after winning the duel with this character.
On defense, yeah. Additionally, you could actually use him to bleed more honor from your opponent if that's the way you were going. Force them to commit and then make a low bid. I don't know how viable that's going to be necessarily, but it's an option.
Yeah, I believe it is. It's a way to play it, and it might come in. I'm sure it'll come into play, occasionally. I don't think this is a card that you include for the sake of doing that. I don't think this is something that you rely on, but it is it could be an option in an honor victory, and I'm sure it'll happen, a decent amount.
So there's been. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I was gonna say definitely an edge case, but it's there, and cards that give you options are always good. So
there has been quite a bit of discussion about Kazin and whether or not he's garbage or whether or not he is a decent character. I think he's in the decent character camp. The argument against Kazin mostly comes down to he's not exceptionally high in military skill for a baseline, and if you lose the duel, you basically just paid an action window to send your character home. I think the strength of Kazin, however, comes from if your opponent sees Kazin on the other side of the board and you send him into a conflict. You can even send him into a conflict with a lot of guys, but that's a little bit more janky. You send him into a conflict, right? Your opponent's going to think, do I send a lot of people to defend this or not? And if they do, he's able to narrow it down to a one-on-one, which turns on cards like Admit Defeat on its own. If he doesn't and he sends a low amount of characters, then he's still playing into cards like Admit Defeat. So Kazin kind of is a little bit of like a damned if you do, damned if you don't kind of card. If you send lots of characters into Kazin, expecting him to just win the duel and send a bunch of them home, I'm very inclined to just say, all right, you win this conflict, and then you bound a bunch of guys for my one guy, giving me a good amount of character advantage. Or if you send one guy, I can just admit defeat. Or if I really want to, I can win the duel and then admit defeat and win the conflict that way. It's worth noting that before you do his duel, you can always buff him up with things like bonsai or katanas, any other attachments that increase military skill, tetsubos if you're allied with the crab. And that'll make him a much, much, much more scary card. I say once he gets above his like base 3, like if he's either honored and gets the 5 that way, or if he is honored plus an attachment or has a couple of attachments on him, then he becomes a lot scarier. He becomes kind of like a Voltron character.
Yeah, I do very much think that this could be kind of like a strategy in and of itself, in that it's very possible to kind of send him in and play this card and kind of buff him up a bunch for the sole sake of sending him in and knowing that you're going to win a duel, and then just admitting defeat and making sure that you break a province every single time he goes in.
It's also
like you could very easily get him up to like 7-8 strength, pretty easily, and break every single province that he goes to if you could, as long as you can win the duels.
Yeah, I think he's also pretty solid on defense. Like again, if you have those bumps in hand, and your opponent commits a couple of characters, like if they're playing a weenie deck, their characters probably aren't very strong individually, so we can easily narrow it down to a one-on-one, and that's where he shines. He's going to be good in those conflicts where your opponent has a bunch of weak characters, or like weaker than him.
Important to note too that his ability isn't restricted to being in a military conflict; it's any type of conflict. So you could use him in a variety of ways, either in military or on political. And typically, because if political guys have lower military skill, then it advantages him a little bit, right?
Mm-hmm. He also has the duelist trait, which we also saw in the Doji Challenger, and we don't know entirely. We haven't seen any cards that key off that yet, but it's a trait, so I assume it does. The Kenshinzen trait, I think, is mostly for fluff. I don't think there's going to be... Kenshinzen are so rare in the fluff that I don't think there's going to be anything that keys off it. But it's cool knowing that he's considered in the lore to be of the highest order of duelist, which is what the Kenshinzen are. So, in the fluff, he's meant to be a really powerful character. His card is kind of lukewarm for me. I think he's not trash, but he's not amazing either. He's also just another military guy, which I guess is fine. I think we've seen more military guys than politics guys, but that's about to change.
Yes. I think you can just compare his raw stats to Doji Challenger, which is another 3-cost base character. It's a little bit down, right? So he's only got 2 political, the Doji Challenger's 3. But then you're paying more for his ability, right?
Yeah. And
like I was stating, I very much think that this is a card that, like, maybe you play just as a defense character, but I honestly believe that this might be a card that you can base an entire deck around, just based on the effect and the way the Crane play around having like single opponents.
I think if duelist decks ever become a thing, and there's a lot of military duels, and there's like ways to pump up, like there could be like attachments that give you extra strength in duels only, that work well with duelists, then you can maybe see a duelist deck, and then he'll be much better in those sorts of decks. Right now, I think he's probably included just because he's a solid mid-range body, and he's got a situationally very useful ability. All right, moving on outside of the 3-drops and into the 4-drops. Is this Dan's card, right? Yeah.
Yep. I get the first 4-drop.
You get a good one. Yeah.
Yeah, I like this card a lot. So, Asahina Storyteller. He's a 4-cost character with 2 military skill and 4 political skill. He has 2 glory. He has the Courtier, Shugenja, and Air traits. He has the Sincerity keyword, and Sincerity means when this character leaves play, draw 1 card. Additionally, he has each honored Crane character you control gains Sincerity. So, I think this card is really, really good.
This card will be broken if Crane gets enough honor effects. I'm going to call it now. This card will be the bane of everyone's existence if Crane gets like enough honor effects to make an honor deck truly cancerous. If you get a bunch of events that honor characters, and you honor characters, and then you cycle those events to honor more characters, this guy just becomes ridiculous. And I don't know how I feel about it in that regard. I feel like there's a very fine line to tread with a card like this.
All right, once again, let me play devil's advocate because I don't know that I agree. I don't know that this card will... I think it's okay. I think it's an okay card at the very least, but I don't know that it'll be broken solely because, especially with a deck like Crane that's really good at generating honor like that, I'm not actually sure yet, having not seen all the cards, how good card draw is going to be.
So,
you have the ability, technically speaking, strictly speaking, if things play out in certain ways, you have the ability to draw 5 cards a turn if you really need them. I'm not convinced that drawing what this is going to end up being, like probably 3 or 4 cards off of this card, is actually worth that much.
So here's the thing. If you draw 5 cards, it's costing you honor to do so. Even if your opponent also draws 5 cards, it doesn't cost you any net honor. But if you drew less cards, you would have gained honor, so it is actually costing you honor. So this guy drawing you 3 or 4 cards is effectively him saying gain an additional honor every single time you draw a card.
In a way,
this is true. Yeah, in some way that's true. And I think this is at least okay in like an honor-based deck, and I think you would definitely play it in that. But I'm not sure. I'm not sure that I think it's all that.
I think
big. At the very most, unless something absurd happens and we find out that they have some way to honor 7 or 8 characters over the course of 3 or 4 turns while this character is sitting out. I don't feel like this character is going to be that much because that's at most a 3 or 4 honor swing.
If there are enough honor effects in conflict deck, this becomes like a self-feeding loop. You honor a character, it leaves play, you draw a card that probably honors another character that leaves play and draws a card. It could cycle really heavily. And this is one of those cards that could very easily is one of my strongest contenders for putting lots of fate on, just because of that. If this is a card I want to keep an eye on, as more honor effects come out or are spoiled in the core set, this card is going to get exponentially better the more your conflict deck is full of cards that are cheap, aka 0 or 1 cost that honor characters. And it can create this engine where you're basically gaining 2 honor every time a character leaves play because you don't need to draw cards with your dial at the start of the turn.
So I think additionally, he has the Courtier and Shugenja traits. So up to this point, we've only seen 1 trait on a character, right? He has Courtier, so he can play For Shame, and he has Shugenja, so he can play Cloud the Mind, and whatever other cards that come out where you're required to have either one of those traits in play. So having both of those traits on 1 character seems really, really relevant.
Yeah, he allows you to play Shugenja events and attachments. He allows you to play Courtier events and attachments. And I think those are going to be really relevant for a Crane deck. Again, I think out of the core set, Crane is going to be an honor deck, so I think when we say that if you want to play, you're going to want to play this in an honor deck, it means you're basically going to want to play this in Crane out of the core set.
Yeah, I think
Crane's going to have an honor victory. It's going to happen. There's too many cards that go for that honor victory, and too few options to not pick them.
Yeah, I don't know. It's just it seems very expensive for what it is. It may or may not be very good, but I based on my current analysis of how this is, I think it will be okay, and you will pretty much be required to play it at the very least out of the core set, and probably continuing on if you're playing an Honor Crane. But I just want to believe that this card is bad. It doesn't seem that great unless Honor becomes a little bit more important than it seems. Like, it is important, but unless like it becomes something where you can completely stop your opponent from doing something with it, or like, you know, the 3 or 4 Honor max that you're getting out of what you're probably going to pay like 6 Fate for, like an entire turn's worth of Fate to play, is relevant, then I'm not sure that this card will be that good.
Yeah, I think this might just be something we disagree with until we play more. But the games where I got this on the board have been pretty gross if I got it to stick and get Honor Train going. I can only imagine it gets even more ridiculous if there's enough cards that honor characters as the game goes on. It's core set, so it's evergreen. I'm a little worried about how this card scales up as the game gets bigger. But that said, it's a good card right now. It's only going to get better if more effects come out. That's my statement on it. 2-4 for 4 is about... I mean, I guess we've only seen 3-4 drops, so like it's about middle road for a 4 drop that we've seen, and 2 glory means that it gets even better. The fact that it draws you cards, gravy.
I don't know. We'll find out. We can disagree for now until we actually find out like how this game functions overall.
I definitely think the cost is a bit of an issue, given that you were only getting 7 Fate a turn. Having to dump 4 of that, 4/7 of that, right, onto this guy and maybe more might be important. It's not something you want to do first turn for sure, right?
Yeah, he's definitely a timing relevant card. You play him when you've already got a couple of characters and like and honor effects to key off them. He combos really well with Savvy Politician, with Brash Samurai, with any other sort of honoring effect you might have. The Fire Ring can essentially be like half an Earth Ring now, because your honored character leaves play and draws you a card. And Crane has a lot of high glory.
You just said you have to play Savvy Politician with this card too, and I stated that I didn't like that one either. So that might have something to do with this.
That's probably why. Man, I don't know. I think drawing cards without spending honor to do it is a blessing in disguise, and this is the only card we've seen that really does that outside of a couple of other niche ways.
Passive card draw is good in any card game, right? And getting to see more of your conflict deck should be good. So we'll just see how it works functionally. I think, like you said, it's more of a timing-based card. It's not something you play on turn 1, more on turns 2+. So I don't think there's this like magical Christmas land where he's going to draw you 6 cards in a turn, which I've heard some podcasts talk about. It's probably more of like a 2 to drip or something.
He's gonna draw you 1 card base because he's gonna leave play no matter what. And then I don't think it's unreasonable to get a couple of honored characters to leave play before he does. So I assume he's going to be a 2 or 3 card draw, which you can view as a 2 or 3 honor gain, in addition to your honor gain from honored characters leaving play. So his effect to me almost reads all honored characters give you an additional honor when they leave play, but that would be slightly better. So it's slightly worse than that. Great card. Like, honest to God, I do think this card is good. Going on to the next card, I believe it's mine. This is Guest of Honor. Guest of Honor is a 4-cost card with 1 military skill, 4 political skill, a courtier trait, 1 glory, and the text that reads, while this character is participating in a conflict, opponents cannot play events. Man, oh man, did I underestimate this card. I only had like 1 of it in my deck when I was playing online test games against Crane, and this might have been, the keyword there might be against Crane, but both times I got this card into play, the one of copy, it did work. It turns off a ton of combat math. It basically says you can still play all your tricks, your opponent can't play any of theirs except for attachments, and attachments are not nearly as powerful as events, simply by the fact that events are 1 and done and attachments stay in play. So it basically just strictly hampers your opponent's ability to do stuff in conflicts. You can throw it in military conflicts and turn off Bonsai. You can turn off Fallen in Battle. You can turn off a number of clan-specific effects like Way of the Lion. This card is pretty solid for your 4-drop.
You can defend with it and it turns off at mid-defeat.
Yep.
And I have to say too, like just because of the way that L5R functions, because you have two separate decks, this is kind of an interesting way to look at a card. Because like there are a lot of cards that control like this in other games. You know, there are a lot of times where a card game will have a card that says like, oh, your opponent can't play traps or whatever for a turn, or like they can't react with X card type for a turn. But like in a game where you literally have you have two decks, and one of those decks is almost solely rather dependent on, or there for things like events. Like it effectively should be about half events and half attachments with like a few characters and province, or God, I'm forgetting the name, but a few other cards sprinkled in. But with a lot of the combat effects, the ones that change combat drastically, at least being events, this card is definitely strong. Like those are actually one of the only ways to react to something in combat, and it seems like, at least from what we've seen from Crane and Lion so far, that a lot of your ability to actually win a combat or defend against a province getting broken is dependent on events.
Yeah, counterspell on a character seems good.
It's technically not counterspell because your opponent doesn't play the event. It just stays in their hand. But it's great. It's a nice way to give yourself some insurance in a conflict. If you throw this in a political, 4 strength is nothing to sneeze at. And 4 strength when your opponent can't play any tricks, and you throw in like another character with it. Very similar to Aussie and a Storyteller. This is like a mid-game card. You bring it out with like 1 fate and keep it around for a couple turns just to give yourself 2 conflicts that it does work in, and your opponent basically will be very limited in what they can do to stop you. So unlike Aussie and a Storyteller, which is very an honor-based thing, this strikes me as either a very defensive card in an honor deck or a very aggressive card in like a deck that's looking to take provinces without your opponent being able to really stop you.
It is admittedly a little expensive, which is maybe a downside to playing 3 of them in a deck, but I still think it's very good for what it is. Secondarily, this is a guest of honor, and it has absolutely nothing to do with honoring, and is probably one of the worst cards I've seen in Crane to actually honor. Saying.
I mean,
just to bring that up, just to bring it up for aesthetics purposes.
Thematic doesn't really work, right?
Yeah.
It does have courtier trait. Again,
art's also only B tier. It's only B tier art. This is not the greatest art I've ever seen.
This is true too.
Is she like playing with toys?
I think it is some sort of storytelling, or something like that. I don't know. She's definitely holding some sort of props. And considering it's a Crane character, storytelling is probably right up its alley. Yeah, it's a good card. Not much else to say. Turns off events. Very niche effect. Well, actually, not that niche of an effect, but niche enough that I don't think you want 3 of this in your deck. Card draw is always good, so I think you probably want 3 Asahina Storytellers, but this is like your finisher. It's your I'm ready to win the game now, and I'm gonna just throw this out just to crush any chance.
Yeah, this is very much a card where I think you want 1 on the board, but I don't think you ever want to see more than 1 in a game. So it becomes difficult. Where like you definitely want to see it, but you don't want to see more than 1 of it. I don't think.
Yeah, 2 of these is pretty nil, unless like it's really strong in a political conflict. I might throw this into a military just to turn off military tricks, but like paying 4 for 1 military strength is real feels bad man territory. So let's go on. Gentry, it seems you are the lucky one to get the clan champion Doji Hotaru.
Get the wonderful honor of introducing Doji Hotaru. She is 5 fate, 3 military strength, 6 political strength, a Bushi champion with 3 glory, the highest that we've seen on any card. I'd imagine that that's going to be the case with all of the champions. I would guess that they probably will all have high glory, except maybe for Scorpion. Reaction: after you claim a ring during a political conflict in which this character is participating, resolve that ring's effect. I have found out firsthand how absolutely ridiculous that is. When you can swing for 4 honor in a deck that's planning on winning on honor anyway, or can swing for 2 honor while defending a province. That's actually absurd. There's a good reason that this card is 5 cost, because that effect is absolutely insane, and this card's stats are fantastic when it gets honored. Like a 6/9 for 5 fate is crazy. It's unheard of, I think. Outside of like champions, I don't think there will be anything even vaguely close to that.
Yeah.
This is definitely the effect we're expecting from a clan champion, right? Just something that's absolute blowout with really good stats. There were some jokes about her being a 6/9 when honored, especially with the Kachiko fiction. But that effect's incredible. Getting a ring effect outside of attacking, I think, is really, really good because it opens that option. And then obviously doubling an effect is really good. So the card's just good. What else are you going to say? You'd hope for the champion to be good, and it is.
Yeah. 3 glory. Oh, man. Very double-edged sword, but Crane has a lot of honor effects. And she's definitely one you want to save an honor effect for. She's pretty good, base stats. When she's honored, she's a truck. And I've had so many opponents just not know what to do against her. It's just a case of she's just a ball of stats with a really she sort of like accelerates your winning too. She's kind of win more, but she makes you win to begin with. So she kind of like win mores off of herself winning. So yeah, she's really weak to effects that will make her not participate in political conflicts, of which we have seen one, I think. Oh, I guess like Mori Kuroi can switch it from a political to a military, which makes her sad.
Oh no, I only have 6 strength now.
And I don't get my second ring. So I'm going to talk a little bit about her effect and what I have found to be relatively effective with it. Because obviously when you're looking at double rings, the ring math kind of changes a bit. I have found that the 2 best rings, air is an obvious choice if you want to go and you're trying to rush honor. That is like straight up rush. You're sacrificing tempo for rush. But I think one of my personal favorite rings to trigger with her is fire. Because not only does fire honor herself, it also honors somebody else. And combine that with Asahina Storyteller, you've got an engine. You're honoring 2 characters a turn with that, and you are just drawing all of your conflict deck. Which, incidentally, could be bad, as we learned. That if you run out of cards in either deck, you shuffle them back in and lose 5 honor. But it's really fun. It makes Fire Ring just like a huge stat swing. The first time you do it, you get 3 on her, plus probably 2 on someone else. You just gain 5/5 in stats and honored 2 people and gain 2 honor. It's ridiculous. It's so fun, and it fits really hard with like the lore fluff that we read. That she was like, where Nurishima was watching her fight and was talking about how she was able to bounce between the different elements, I'm assuming, in relation to like the kata she was using and the way that she would fight. So she seems like a very versatile character who can do what you need her to do when you need her to do it. And just a big ball of stats, always good.
Oh, she's a champion. I think that's pretty much the
she is
takeaway here. She is the champion, and it's reflected.
I don't think it needs to be said that Hotaru will be a 3 times in every Crane deck for a while.
For sure. I think that's probably going to be true of every champion. I'm pretty sure you're going to play them in almost every deck every time.
You say that, I do think that maybe some decks in certain factions may run lower curve.
It's possible.
After a time. Especially if you go like full Rush Swarm Weenie with like Lion or something. Then you may not use your clan champion, even though he's very good, just to be able to more consistently pump out lots of guys and not get clogged. But if you're playing a deck with a smooth curve that caps out at 5, which seems to be the case here, Hotaru is your cap, and you probably want 3 of her. Keeping her around for longer is very good. Yeah. Saving, I like to save a couple of Fate every turn when I play Crane, until Hotaru shows up, just so I can slap a couple of Fate on her right away, and then still have Fate left over to continue building a board around her. So usually around turn 3 or 4, she comes out, and then she's in play for the rest of the game, hopefully.
So from a play perspective, do you typically go pay 6 to put 1 on her, or actually pay 7 to put 2 on her?
I think you want to get 2 on her almost right away. I think she's one of the ones that's really worth going for 2, because there's not many discard effects that will affect Hotaru, I think. The main discard effects we've seen have very strict restrictions on them, like Assassinate or Isawa Masahiro. They have very strict like cost restrictions, and then dishonoring Hotaru is going to be really hard, so you're going to have a hard time doing I Can Swim or Noble Sacrifice on her. Because again, if you're getting double Fire Ring, or you have Way of the Crane, or any other sort of honoring effects, it'll make it really hard to keep her dishonored, so you can discard her in that way. So I think she's pretty resilient, and she's pretty safe to put 2 Fate on.
I agree.
And she's one where you want to get her effect every turn, so the longer you do it, the better. Yeah, and obviously a thing with uniques that I kind of touched on earlier, if you put more Fate on them, they stay around for more turns, which increases the chance that you will see another copy of them giving you a free Fate later. So it's kind of a thing. I think 2 is kind of the sweet spot. I think 1 is a sweet spot for a good card that you want to get multiple turns out of. 2 is for like those very swingy cards where, like, I think 2 Fate would be her and Asahina Storyteller are the 2 ones I really consider really prime 2 Fate candidates. Just because their effects go so well.
Yeah, definitely. And one thing to consider too is putting extra Fate on these high cost characters is sort of like pseudo gaining that much extra Fate, right? So like every extra Fate that you put on Hotaru is like gaining 5 Fate in the next turn, in a way.
Sort of, yes. It has an exponential return. An extra Fate placed on Hotaru is worth a lot more than an extra Fate placed on a Doji Whisperer. So your lower cost characters you'll typically not put Fate on, I think, just because they have lower returns than your higher cost characters. That Fate is better off saved for when you have a higher cost character to put it on. And that's what I mean by, like, you save a Fate or 2 every turn. So you, like, only spend 6 Fate a turn. You might get 1 from passing. You might get 1 from a ring. So every turn you're accumulating 2 or 3 extra Fate to play around with. So if you flip a high cost character, you have the ability to play it, put some Fate on it, and still have Fate left over to do tricks and whatnot like that. So you're not breaking the bank to do it. So economics, kids, save money. Open a savings account, save a Fate every turn. It'll pay off in the long run. So with Doji Hotaru, we've now completed the... Oh, I'm wrong. Sorry. There's one more card. I'm so bad. Dan, finish off the Dynasty deck here.
Oh, with the holding?
Yes, with Artisan Academy.
Yes. So we're done with Dynasty characters, and so we're going to look at the 1 Crane holding. It is Artisan Academy. It adds 1 province strength to whatever province it's sitting in. It is the Academy trait. It has the action... During the conflict phase, reveal the top card of your conflict deck. Until the end of the phase, you may play that card as if it were in your hand. So obviously this is sort of pseudo card draw, and it's supposed to play around with the idea that if you're Crane, you shouldn't be bidding high to spending honor to draw cards. But I'm a little on the fence about how good this card actually is.
Yeah. It really sucks. I kind of forgot that Hotaru wasn't the end of the Dynasty deck, so I was like, wow, that's a really good note to end the Dynasty deck on. No, and then we got to go to Artisan Academy. So this card is a pseudo card draw, and we mean pseudo in about as much of a way as pseudo can possibly mean. And that if you just flip over a card that's not very useful that turn, then you just gave your opponent information about what you're going to draw next, and you gained nothing in return. So this card is very hit or miss, and I'm not sure I like it.
Additionally, it's an action to trigger. So I think the best comparison to it is we've seen the partial spoiler for the Phoenix holding, which straight up lets you draw a card.
Yeah.
And I think this is strictly worse than that card.
Yeah. The Phoenix holding does have the restriction of the draw has to be in the draw phase, I believe. But that's right before conflict anyways, and I think I'm triggering this at the beginning of conflict almost every time just to see what it is. Because, like, there's no point in, like... Unless you can somehow scry the top couple cards of your deck and know what's there without your opponent knowing, then there's no point in keeping it secret. Might as well flip it over, see what it is, and then make your game plan around it. It's also worth noting that shuffle effects absolutely ruin this card and make it worthless, other than the +1 strength it gives to the province it's in. So I don't know. It's okay. You'll probably see play just to help you, like, maybe dig a little deeper sometimes. Maybe you get exactly the card you need on top, but sometimes you don't, and then you know you're going to draw a dead card with your honor next turn, so it's kind of...
Yeah, admittedly, it doesn't seem all that good, but the only things I see it being are, one, it, as far as I can tell, is free, unless they change something with that, and secondarily, although the card draw may or may not be important, I'm honestly going to call that null effectively. It is possible that stalling out an opponent with actions is decent in a Crane deck where you want to know ahead of time what kind of conflicts you're going to be getting into. So there might be some value in that. I don't see this being that good, but if there is some value, I think it'll come from the fact that it's just an action for free.
Yeah, I think this card will be run in decks. I think it'll be used the turn you get it, and then I think it'll be promptly discarded to replace with a new card next turn. If you get 2 of these face up as well, God, that's awful. That's so bad. You're just down a province, basically. Unless you flip over the top card, play it, and then flip over the next card and also play it. That seems exceedingly unlikely.
So from a deck building perspective, obviously holdings go in your Dynasty deck with all of your Dynasty characters. Is this better than having a character in your deck, like another Doji Whisperer type character?
I would say no. Maybe.
In this case,
I
would say almost assuredly no. Like, I think in some cases, yes, the holdings will be worth it, but I think with this particular holding, almost definitely not.
We haven't seen
unless we're just short on characters.
Yeah, we haven't seen the entire card pool, so right now it kind of goes into decks because we have like all the green characters, but there's still like a handful of neutral characters we haven't seen, as well as a handful of neutral events, and maybe with enough 0-cost cards that are situationally just like always like fine to play. Like if you have your deck full of like bonsais, Netflix showing in there, fine katanas, yeah. And like things that are like gonna basically you just want to play them when they show up typically anyways, then this card's probably okay. Right now I've just had a couple of times where I've flipped over like latest fashion or above question when it's just not that useful and I don't really want to spend the fate to play those, and then I just legitimately gave my opponent information of what I'm drawing next turn. So the times when I flipped over Bonsai or Admit Defeat, fantastic card, love it. Otherwise, not so much. It's a little hit or miss for me.
Yeah, I'm definitely leaning towards miss. If it was +2 holding strength, maybe it's nice, better than having a character, but I think in most cases you'd rather have a character, even though that does give +1 basically skill in whatever conflict is going to happen at that province.
Yeah, I do think there will be a point when decks are refined enough that like you don't really care what's on top of your deck, you'll probably be able to play it. But like right now, there's just enough clutter in there that like it can get really awkward to use this card effectively. It might change over time, but right now I'm lukewarm on it. It'll probably be like a 2 of in my decks, just because it's like situationally that +1 strength is going to matter, and situationally it'll draw me the exact card I need. But I'm not flipping over backwards for it.
Yes, I may or may not end up running this if I play Crane, but right now it doesn't look too promising unless there's just kind of not anything that's better.
Yep.
It's very much a card that gets out after Core Set. This is almost assuredly going to drop out as soon as we get a few more cards.
Yeah, if Crane get a different holding, I think you probably replace this with that. Unless that holding is also just like definitively bad. Like this is not definitively bad, this just strikes me as like just okay and situationally not helpful at all, and therefore you lost a province and that's not great. Like you lost a province slot, I mean, not like your actual province, but yeah. So that wraps up the Dynasty deck. We're going to move into the Conflict deck, which is a little shorter, thankfully. So we're going to start off with the Conflict character, Steward of Law. So this is Crane's only Conflict character. It's a 1 Fate, 1 Military, 1 Political, 0 Glory, Courtier Scholar character. And it has an effect that's always on. That is, while this character is participating in a conflict, characters cannot become dishonored. So I was kind of like meh on this card at first, But then I learned you can combo it with For Shame, and now it's very good. It's an amazing card. 10 out of 10.
This card is fantastic. I agree with you completely. I think you
It's
run
great.
3 of them on all of the decks and use it all the time because it's really good.
He's a courtier, so he turns on For Shame by himself too. So like your opponent could just be like, you could say like a situation where like you don't have any characters, or your opponent doesn't have any characters, or only has one character left that they're about to attack you with, and you go, nah, I'm gonna ambush in Steward of Law and attack you. And they're like, it's fine, it's just a 1/1, and then you For Shame their defender, and then he's a 1/1 that won a conflict for you for 1 fate. That's pretty good. And characters from hand as well are pretty good, just because they can surprise your opponent, and your opponent won't play around them. Just comes out when your opponent least expect it, or like when they have no more defenders, and they win you a conflict that otherwise you might not have been able to do.
Yeah, stats-wise, he's exactly what you expect for a 1-drop, right? And then he just has this conflict-breaking ability that you can use in a variety of ways that are just fantastic. Awesome card. It's also only 1 influence. We should probably talk about influence costs on conflict cards.
Oh yeah, that's true. We should talk about the fact that this guy is easily splashable, and if you're like a deck that's easily susceptible to dishonor, he's probably worth consideration. Some other things to note with this guy: while he does make For Shame bow straight up, your opponent doesn't get to choose because they cannot pick Dishonored. He does have a little bit of a synergy with the Crane province, because that dishonors enemy characters, and provinces are broken before characters go home. So I think that your opponent, if you defend your Crane province with this character, you just don't do that unless you're really confident it's not going to break, because then you just save your opponent a bunch of dishonored characters.
Yeah, although it does give your opponent a reason to attack that province to begin with, because this card exists in your deck, and going in a competitive game, obviously your opponent knows that you're playing this, I would assume, given that this card doesn't suddenly become bad for some reason. So, I mean, there's a little bit of mind game factor in it too, but I think overall this card is just way too good not to run 3 of, based on, For Shame and it just being a way to stop dishonors, it being an ambushable character that you can just kind of throw an extra 1/1 into a conflict if you really needed it. And the 1 province, it's only 1 province out of, theoretically, at least, once we see all of them out of the 4 or 5 that you're going to be playing, rather, that it technically has a synergy with. But other than that, it seems phenomenal.
Yeah, it also says characters in general cannot become dishonored, not even just characters in the conflict. So if you know your opponent's using a Fire Ring attack to sort of like dishonor a specific character like Hataru, he just says, nah, I'm going to defend, and that's not going to happen, because characters cannot be dishonored while he's participating, period. So yeah, it's a cool card. One of the more playable ambush characters we've seen, though we haven't seen that many. So 1 cost seems just right.
Yeah.
Alright, let's move on.
So the next one is our first attachment. It is Above Question. This is a 1-cost attachment. Gives you no stats, but what it does do is prevent any attached character from being chosen as the target of an event by your opponent. And this seems okay on the surface. I'm not entirely sure. Until we see the entire card pool, it's really, really hard to determine how good or bad this card is. In the few Crane mirrors that I've seen and played, it seems pretty alright, because you can prevent your, Crane has a lot of targeting bow effects, and targeting effects that like bring a character into a conflict or send a character out of a conflict. So it seems fairly helpful as a 1 attachment that you can just toss on a character anytime you need for those specific situations, but I'm not entirely certain how good it's going to be outside of, playing against Crane. So that's going to be more of a thing that we determine after the card pool. But in the case of a Crane versus Crane, it's a great card.
Yeah.
So I guess it stops stuff like blackmail and assassination from the things that we've seen. Oh, and the swim card. I'm spacing out on the name right now.
I can swim.
I can swim. So maybe that's relevant. It seems mediocre to me. It's a 1-cost attachment. If it costed nothing, I think it's just over the top playable. But at 1, you're probably playing it on a lower cost guy, so you're effectively increasing their fate cost by 1. Or, I mean, I guess you could drop it at Hotar 2 to prevent her from getting hit with something, but it seems a little bit more niche.
Yeah, here's the thing with this card for me. We've seen a lot of events, and a lot of events we want to stop from being played. Almost very few of them target your character in a meaningful way that like you can't already deal with. Of things that target your character, we've got For Shame, we've got I Can Swim, we've got Noble Sacrifice, and a lot of the big events I think are going to be played are the Strength Pumps, or the Bow, the many I think that actually target characters, and it's just because it only works on events. I don't know. I feel like if this was like attached character cannot be targeted by opponent effects, instantly playable at 1 cost. But at 1 cost just to stop events, I don't know. A lot of events also have like stipulations that means they can only hit characters of cost 2 or less. So you are paying 1 extra fate to protect a 2 cost or less character from those events. That doesn't seem good. That seems very like okay, yeah, you do that. So I don't know. I'm very, very questionable on this card at the moment. If we get a lot, like if Scorpion just have a crap ton of targeted events, which I'm sure they will, and like a couple of other factions have some targeted events that are really annoying, or maybe neutral events that see a lot of play, this card becomes a little better. But you have to play it proactively to a situation that might not even exist. So you're playing it on a character, and then your opponent might not even have events that target your character. Or your opponent might not even might have had different ways of dealing with that character that go around this. It's like, it's super niche in what it protects you from. And I feel like for 1 cost, it doesn't protect you from enough. That's my thoughts.
Yeah, pretty much. Like I said, it seems pretty good in the Crane Mirror, just given the effects to protect certain characters. I don't know if it's a card that you necessarily run 3 of or anything, but like it can protect a character or 2 from certain events. That helps a lot. You know, you can prevent For Shames and things like that, which is really good. But outside of a Crane Mirror, outside of a Crane Mirror, or like splashing this into a deck specifically against Crane, we'll have to see how good it is. It's completely dependent on the card pool as it gets revealed, I think.
Yeah, I think the big thing with this is that a lot of the effects that I want to stop are on characters or on attachments so far. And a lot of the stuff in this game is designed around buffing your own guys and not so much attacking your opponent's guys. There's a couple of attacking your opponent's guys, but a lot of stuff like Lion Clan as a whole is based around just buffing up a bunch of your guys. Dragon Clan is about buffing up your guys. Unicorn is about making your guys go into battles and not really necessarily like bowing your opponent's dudes. Crab is probably not going to have a lot of offensive ability. So like Scorpion and Phoenix seem to be the big ones that this might do work against. And that really just comes down to how strong they are in the meta as it develops, which we have no idea right now. But it's a card that seems okay and probably won't see play unless the meta dictates a lot of events that target your guys that are very, very impactful. That's about all there is to it.
Yeah, I agree. If it blocked event or opponent effects, so like Asawa Masahiro, then it would be much better. But given that it only blocks events, it's a lot more limited.
Yep. I feel like it just doesn't provide enough for 1 cost. If it costs 0, sure, I'm all over it. 0 cost costs me literally nothing but a card. Why not? 1 cost, that suddenly starts dipping into my fate return, and the returns on that are not so great. So let's move on to a much more playable attachment, in my opinion. Why don't you get this, Dan?
Yep. So this is Duelist Training. It is a 1 cost attachment. It gives you no skill bonuses. It costs 1 influence if you were to splash it in a non-Crane deck. It is a technique, and it has an essay of text on it, alright? Attached character gains action. While this character is participating in a conflict, choose a participating character controlled by your opponent. Challenge that character to a military duel. Instead of giving honor for this duel's bid, a player may choose and discard the required number of cards from hand. Bow the loser of the duel. So this is a bow effect, which I think bow effects are going to be very good in this game, but it's hidden behind the duel. You do get to pick who you duel, so you can bully duel, and you don't have to give up honor, which is good if you're Crane, because you don't want to give up honor, I think, under any circumstances.
Yeah, agreed. This attachment strikes me as very good, especially if you put it on one of your higher end characters like Hotaru. Lots of stats, military duel, bow a target character essentially. If you have more military stats than a target character, you can bow it. So Lion's Pride Brawler is a really good card in a lot of people's mind. This kind of like lets you semi-port a Lion's Pride Brawler over, such that if they want to keep their character ready, they have to give you honor, which as Crane you're probably more than okay with. So this is a great attachment, and it's a duelist card, so I'm okay with that being the case.
Interestingly, too, you mentioned this being good on Hotaru, but I think, at least, again, from my experiences looking at Crane Mirrors, it's actually pretty decent against Hotaru as well. It's very, very possible to like throw this onto a Narishma or something along those lines and buff them up, or like a Doji Challenger and buff them up, and just to take out Narishma, or Hotaru rather. And I think this will very much be a card that allows you to play around certain characters and kind of just get them out of conflicts that you don't want them in, especially if it's a more political based character.
Depends on the effect of that character. If that character has a strong action effect, they can still play it while bowed, but if they have high stats, then this card is also a little riskier to pull off. So like, you gotta have it like on a character that has either an effect that requires it to bow, or it has to be a character that's impactful but not more impactful than your guy that you're using to dual strain. But that said, it can also be used in a political conflict. So maybe you send like your really buff military guy into a political conflict and bow a weak political chud. Or maybe a strong political chud with weak military. It is one influence, so one thing of note is that this is probably going to be a hallmark card for the splash of Crane. If your opponent splashes Crane or you're splashing Crane, you probably want this card. If you're a military deck, this card quite simply says, like if you're Lion, for example, this card probably just says, pay 1, give a character action, bow an enemy character. And that's ridiculous. That's insanely good for those types of decks. So this is going to be a reason to splash Crane, as well as being a solid card. For one influence, too.
It also interestingly makes Kaizin a little bit better. I don't know how relevant that is or how good Kaizin is going to be, but I kind of like the idea of Kaizin being its own deck. Yeah, and this does admittedly make him significantly better.
Yeah, if we get something that makes duelists a little better at duels, like maybe like a duelist attachment that gives them stats in a duel or something like that, or maybe like there will be like something that allows a duelist to bid after your opponent has bid, so they can bid the exact amount they need to win. Then like Kaizin with this can like duel someone to make it a one-on-one, and then use this to just bow them, and that's kind of funny. That's a really
he basically
cool
becomes a
thing. He becomes
wrecking crew.
Yeah, and that's kind of like classic duel decks from the old game. Would just like be like, we start a battle, and then these two guys are going to duel, and then I win because my deck's built around dueling, so that guy dies, and then I'm going to duel this guy, and that guy dies. I'm going to bow that guy. I'm going to send that guy home and gain honor. All off duel effects. So that's kind of how dueling used to work. So maybe that'll exist in here with enough duelist effects. But yeah, this is a solid attachment for one. Any other thoughts, Dan? Alex?
Nah, I mean, I think we've covered everything. It seems like a good card. It's probably going to get played for sure. It's probably going to be splashable. That's about it.
Bow effects are good.
Bow effects are good. Yeah, turns out turning off your opponent's stats are pretty good. Yeah. Alright, so once more, I'm kind of giving the short end of the stick here. I'm going to take Height of Fashion. Oh boy, this attachment. I like it thematically. Just because it's a really expensive, pretty dress that makes you real good at politics because you're so pretty. And that's about all it does. It's a 2 cost, plus 0 military, plus 4 political attachment. And it is a condition that also has the text that it cannot be played during a conflict. Man, if this could be played during a conflict, I would like it a lot more. But it might have just been borderline too good for 2 cost if you could play it in a conflict. Because it is a 4 stat swing in politics where stat swings don't really exist.
Yeah, admittedly, like even stat-wise, 2 for 4 stats, especially because it's all condensed into 1 stat, is pretty good. Like we were talking about, 1-3 or 1-2 rather being like pretty standard, I guess, as a 2, or rather 3 of stats per fate being pretty standard. So this is a little bit lower than that, but because it's all condensed into political, it does seem a little bit ahead on that. But I agree with you. The fact that it's all kind of that you do have to preempt it makes it a lot worse than it could be.
Also, 2 costs. 2 costs is a lot in this game. You don't just have like a lot of money flying around willy-nilly. You're probably paying like 5 or 6 fate a turn on characters. So going into conflict, spending 2 of your fate that you're saving probably for more characters in the future or for more impactful, like you can pay 2 1-cost events for this. You can play 2 duelist trainings for that cost. Granted, that's still 2 cards, but like I think 2 duelist trainings might give you more than a 4 strength swing, especially in a political conflict when there's a lot of low military political guys going around. So like I don't know, it's an alright card. It's a filler card to me. It's a card that like I feel like is going to get replaced by the time we have the full core set out, and it might not see much play for me.
So I think another way to think about the card is you're sort of going to have to defer buying a 2-cost character or spending 2 extra fate in the Dynasty phase to play this card, and it's sort of like adding in a 2-cost 0/4, which I don't know the ratio is necessarily that great, and additionally you have to play it preemptively, so you can't surprise your opponent with it like you guys have mentioned. I'm mixed on it. It's definitely not really splashable. It's 3 influence, which is a big chunk considering that we've seen 10 be the influence limits on the 2 strongholds that we've seen.
Oh man, I mean, you bring up even more points though. Like you're basically, instead of playing a second character that might have more stats on it. Granted, I don't think we've seen a 2-cost character for politics. So I guess like if you're all in on politics, this is probably one of the best ways you can get it for fate. If you were just looking for politics stats, but again, you're putting all these buffs on one character, and there's a lot of targeted effects, or there could potentially be like targeted effects that like just bow it or remove it, like because like again, you're probably playing this either you're playing this on an expensive character that already has high stats, in which case it doesn't mean as much, and you're spending even more fate on a really expensive character, and that just becomes really, really expensive, and I'm not sure if you'll get the returns off this, or you're putting it on a low-cost character who's susceptible to blackmail, or susceptible to assassinate, or Isawa Masahiro, and I don't know where it fits.
But Travis, that character is above question. You have no right.
Yeah, I suppose like you. Okay, here we go.
I honestly no. But there is because of the way that the crane looks like it is going to be like a kind of a duelist faction. There might come a point where this is used. I don't think it's useful now. I think I agree with you there. But there might come a point where dueling politically is a thing, and this just becomes a way to kind of push one character type build where you just buff up one guy a whole bunch and just let him walk over to your opponent and win every single province that he wants. I mean, it'll be a very specific build that this goes in, but I can see some value if that's the way that Crane ends up going.
Yeah, I think the hard part here is it's really hard to draw value from the extra 4 political stat. Just because we get so much military stat for free. We get it from Fine Katana, we get it from Bonsai, we get it from like Way of the Lion. There's a lot of like really cheap ways. Ancestral Daisho, the Tetsubo costume gives you 3 and a good effect and can be ambushed. It's like, I guess there's a very limited amount of political bumps, but at the same time, there's not a lot of reason to pump political, except for to have the raw stats to break a province. If there's a reason to pump political, yeah.
Go ahead.
I said if there's a reason, like if we have a thing that's like win a political conflict by 5 or more, then like your opponent discards their hand. Obviously that's OP and would never exist, but you know what I'm saying. If there's something like that, then or like political duels where you want the extra stats, then suddenly this card becomes a lot better. Until then, I'm not so sure.
So when we were talking about provinces, we talked about 4 kind of being the high end or the average that we've seen, kind of for the what we're going to consider good provinces, right? And 4 stats is enough to break a province in a way. Maybe you put this on Kaizen, and he goes into a political conflict and military get somebody out of there, and then he can just break something himself.
Yeah, and that's potentially true. It just seems expensive for what it does. If it was like even like one more political stat or like could be ambushed in, I like it more. But then again, it's probably isn't that because that was just a little too much and a little bit too difficult to play around a 5 stat swing or a 4 stat swing that could be ambushed at any time. Who knows? Right now, I'm not super sold on it.
It's got a haiku on it, though.
It does. It sure does. And also, I like you mentioned the 3 influence before. That just means that no one but the crane can be pretty without paying out the ass for it. So it makes me happy. We're the prettiest. So let's go on now. Gentry, I do believe you got the perfect gift.
I do have the perfect gift for you, Travis. But not yet. This is a 0-cost event. We're finally getting into those. It states, action. Reveal the top 4 cards of each player's conflict deck. Choose one revealed card owned by each player and add it to its owner's hand. Shuffle. I stated my dissatisfaction with this right as soon as I saw it. And it's growing on me a little bit. I still don't know that it's great. It is nice that you get to see 4 cards and you potentially get the answer that you need, especially in Crane, where a lot of your events are just bow events or things like that just let you, get what you need out of a conflict. But at the same time, it's 1 card. I don't know how much value 1 card has in this game, and I've expressed that before, that maybe I believe that this ends up being better in an honor deck, where you kind of want to keep the honor a little bit more, and it is 0 cost, admittedly, so it is kind of just a cycle. But you do give your opponent 1 card, you get 1 card, you do get to choose both. But it's the inner card game player in me, the card game player that's played competitively for years, wants to believe that a +0, or actually a -1 effectively for you, a -1 card advantage just to search for a card isn't very good. But it seems, because of the way this game functions, it seems okay. I'll give it like a mid-tier rating.
Yeah.
Even though I know you love the card.
I don't really love the card. I think it's better in this game than it is in other games. This sort of effect. Because we've seen it in other games. We've seen it in Star Wars LCG, and we've seen it in Game of Thrones.
Netrunner 2.
Yeah, Netrunner did have an effect like this. It obviously never saw play, so I cannot recall what it was. I'm pretty sure it was probably a Jinteki card, right?
So it was just for criminal. It was express delivery. You look at your top 4 and pick one. And so spending a click to filter wasn't great.
It was a click and a credit too with express delivery,
yes.
if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. But here's where I'm gonna make an argument for this card. One, you get to pick both. So in this game, with certain cards in your conflict deck not being able to be played at specific intervals, so like if your opponent has no fate, you can just give them a 2-cost thing, and then that doesn't mean anything, and you gain information knowing they have that in the future. You also get to, as Gentry said, search for a specific card you need right now. So if you need specifically Voice of Honor because you're afraid of Way of the Lion, you can grab your Voice of Honor, and then they probably just won't play their Way of the Lion. And that's a way to sort of control the game. Another thing here is Crane probably won't be drawing all that many cards because they want to be milking honor off of their opponent. They're probably only going to be drawing 2 or 3 cards a turn rather than just going full ham with 5 just to start gaining honor, so they can eventually close out an honor victory with double Air Hotaru or more ways. The other ways they've got honor with Asami or Savvy Politician honored characters. And this card lets you sort of just basically cycle a card, as well as gain some information on what your opponent's running and what and find what you need. So it's a solid card. I don't think it'll stay in decks if we get different card draw.
So I think the best situation I've seen it used in your games was where you played Perfect Gift and gave a Perfect Gift, and then both you and Kiff just kept passing back and forth Perfect Gifts. So that was really funny. I agree with the card advantage. So you're going -1 on card advantage, and in theory, your opponent's deck, every card in your opponent's deck should be good, right? So they should be okay with whatever you give them. I think as decks become more specific and people can construct a little bit more and we have a better sense of the game, this card, I think, falls off. But in a core set environment, I think it's fine.
Yeah, again, I think like it's useful right now as a filler card that you use to dig deeper for the cards you need. Because Crane kind of has a lot of combo-ness to it. You need to have like your specific answer for the specific situation. So if your opponent's defending with just one character, you really need your admit defeat. And if you have an honored character and you win the fire ring to dishonor an opponent's character, then you really need noble sacrifice. You really want, your voice of honor to cancel something, or you need your way of the crane to trigger with your savvy politician. This just kind of helps you piece it together. Again, if better card draw comes out in the future, I don't know if this continues to see play.
I think it's a pretty good assessment. I think it'll definitely be played for the sake of it being core set, but I'm pretty sure, again, like I've been saying with a lot of cards, this definitely gets replaced pretty early, I think, in the cycles.
I like the theme of it, though. Like, it's like the crane is giving you a shitty gift just to put themselves in a better position in the political game. Because, well, wasn't that nice? He gave him a gift. That's so honorable, even though, it was, shitty. And the crane samurai probably gained more out of it than the person who got the gift, just because of image and politicking. So, who knows? It's cool. It's a cool little card. I think it's slightly better in this game than it will be in those other games. Partially because it came out of the core set where there's less cards to replace it, and also because the way card draw works in this game is different than other games where you only draw 1 or 2 cards a turn. So when you're drawing 5 cards a turn, 1 more card doesn't mean as much as it does in other games. So yeah, that's about all there is to really say about the perfect gift for me.
Yeah, seems right.
Yep.
Going on. Dan, you get to tell us about Voice of Honor.
All right, so one of the cards you might want to look for with the perfect gift is Voice of Honor. It is a 0-cost event, and it has an interrupt effect. When the effects of an event would initiate, if you control more honored characters than an opponent, cancel those effects. Additionally, this costs 2 influence. So this is actually just a counterspell, right?
This one is like your opponent paid for it, and now you're just like, no, get it out of here. So
it's going to feel really good to Voice of Honor a blackmail, because someone's going to play into that, right? They're going to be like, well, this is like my only out, and then you're like, nah.
Yeah, it's a control card through and through. No, even worse than blackmail, I think, at times. Like, could you imagine paying the 3 honor for Assassinate, and then it just gets Voice of Honored? It's like you're doing the most dishonorable thing, and then it gets, Voice of Honored. And you lost 3 honor for nothing. That's huge. That's 3 cards. Blows my mind.
Definitely against Crane, you don't do that, right? But but I think you can surprise somebody playing another clan where you're splashing in Crane, and at the 2 influence cost, it's pretty splashable, right? You could probably put 2 in your deck fairly comfortably, maybe 3, and just for a counterspell effect, that seems worth it. Yeah.
Again, I think Lion really like this. Lion have a lot of honor effects we've seen now between Pride and characters coming in honored, and just, Lion looks gross. But beyond that, this sort of effect could really help protect Lion from control effects that they don't want to see. So, again, very splashable card if your deck has honored characters, which I think the premier deck for that is Lion. So Lion really wants to splash Crane, incidentally enough, for both Duelist Training and this card.
Yeah, interestingly enough, it is a little bit of a stipulation, the fact that you do have to have honored characters. It does work really well for, I think, both Crane and Lion, but I do think that this ends up not being splashable in very many other decks. But it is just straight up an amazing card for both of those decks. I think this is definitely an auto-include 3 of in both of them. Well, maybe not 3 of in Lion because it's a lot of influence, but in Crane, you're 100% playing 3 of these. It's amazing. Being able to just stop events whenever you need to is great, and you're almost certainly going to have more honored characters in Crane.
I like to point out that this card makes Savvy Politician better, Gentry.
It does make Savvy Politician better. You're not wrong.
It makes Savvy Politician better.
I still don't think it's a good card, but it does technically make Savvy Politician better.
It's worth noting also in the mirror, the Crane mirror, whoever gets an honored character first and maintains more honored character than the opponent has a huge advantage. Because if your opponent tries to Way of the Crane to honor their characters, you can Voice of Honor it, and then you still have more honored characters than them, and your Voice of Honors are turned on, and theirs are just blank cards. I think Kif learned this the hard way. But,
This is true.
It's worth noting that is
Brutal.
a big thing. So, Crane Mirrors, keep that in mind. You want to get honored characters first and hold more honored characters in your opponent and use Voice of Honor as leverage to keep it that way. So, it's a pretty brutal card. If you have high cost events, this card is just going to ruin you. It's going to feel real bad. So, Scorpion decks be damned.
So a little bit of speculation, actually. So, given that you need honored characters to be able to play the card, I wonder how Scorpion is actually going to be able to deal with Voice of Honor, and if they're going to have a counterspell of their own to kind of prevent things from happening, or to ensure that they're going to get dishonored characters on the board to trigger either their effects or their win condition.
Yeah, I wonder if there's going to be like Voice of Dishonor, you know, or like something similar. I could see like, okay, what do you prize a counter any target event at, right? Probably like 2 costs if it's any event. Like just to cancel any single event. So this honored character thing is probably like a decent enough stipulation that they felt it was fine to make the card cost 0. But at 0, it's great. Because you don't need to have any fate in reserves to always be threatening this card. You just need to have more honored characters, which is what Crane wants to do anyway. So, unless you're losing the game that badly, you're probably going to have this on. And if you are losing the game that badly, then you probably should have just scooped a while ago.
Yeah, pretty much.
Mm-hmm. Good card. Also, just like thematic-wise, if you stop and assassinate or a blackmail, like what's the theme there? Like, are you just like telling off your would-be assassin? Like, how dare you? You should really go home and rethink your life. And they're just like, okay, bye.
I mean, thematically, I guess it kind of ends up being like, you know, the assassin sneaks in and someone's just walking by and they're like, "What are you doing?
You
How
should be
dare
ashamed
you?"
of yourself."
Yeah.
And then the assassin's like, "Yeah, you're right. I'm sorry.
Yep.
I'll lose my honor and go home now." It's something. It's cool. It's too good.
How does it stop a bonsai thematically?
Your voice is louder than their bonsai, so no one hears them yell bonsai, so they get no physical benefit.
Oh, just they feel bad because you were louder than them. They're like, oh man.
Yeah.
I can't
A
discharge
bonsai
the
doesn't.
battle now.
A bonsai doesn't do anything if you can't hear it. So like, if someone says bonsai and you can't hear it, it actually just doesn't do anything.
Makes sense.
That's why you scream it at the top of your lungs, in groups. Yeah.
After Utz.
Yeah, that's why. All right, my card. This is a good card. This is a real good card. This is a 0-cost event, Way of the Crane. This is our Way of event, which every clan gets one of that sort of fits into their theme. For the Crane, it is a philosophy traded event with the action: choose a Crane character you control and honor that character.
It's almost as if we've been referencing this card the entire time.
It's
the entire podcast. I only just now got to it at the end.
Endish. So this is the linchpin of the Crane strategy, right? It's you want to honor characters. This card lets you honor characters for free. I wish I had more than 3 of these in my decks. And this is probably the card I would pick to draw over any other card if I could just top deck a card whenever. Like,
which is good, right?
Yeah,
for a
card
way
is-
of card, like that's exactly what you're looking for. You're looking for a card that you're happy to see every single time. It pretty much fits your clan thematically. And one thing to note too, so this is a conflict card, but it doesn't have an influence cost on it. So this cannot be splashed by another clan.
Yeah, and we see that with Way of the Lion and Way of the Unicorn as well. So it seems to me that the Way of philosophy cards cannot be splashed, specifically because they are a key defining part of that clan. So, yeah, this card is basically, outside of Brash Samurai and to an extent Savvy Politician, the only way you have in-house to trigger honored characters. So other than those 2 things, you have to use the Fire Ring to honor your characters. Or import stuff from other factions that we haven't seen yet.
The effect itself is, I guess vanilla, right? It's just so straightforward. It's like, here, honor this character, which is, you're never going to be upset about that, right? From an art perspective, I'm really excited to actually see all of the Way of cards get their own mat. or at least I'm going to turn one into a mat.
Oh yeah, that'd be super sweet. You can
Wait,
even
unicorn
like
mat sounds OP.
you can even use it. You can even like put it over like a map of Rokugan and have like a seamless transition between the art and the map, and like the way of the crane is like over where the crane lands are, and that could be pretty sweet. I might take that idea. Thank you.
That's awesome. Oh, you're welcome.
Yeah, so card's good. You can think of it like a Fine Katana. Fine Katana's a real good card. It gets you 2 military skill for 0. This card, again, on your 2 or 3 glory characters, gets you 2 or 3 in both skills for 0. So in terms of value, I think it's like the highest value 0 cost card we've seen so far, outside of maybe Way of the Lion. And Way of the Lion, I've mentioned it a couple times now, I might as well explain what it does, is choose a character, a lion character that's participating in a military conflict and double its military strength. So, outside of the upper end of what Way of the Lion gives you, Way of the Crane is probably the highest value card we've seen for next to nothing.
So I actually think Way of the Crane might be slightly better than Way of the Lion, simply because it gives you the honored status, right? Which is there's a few more relevant effects associated with that. Like it turns on things like Voice of Honor, that when that character leaves play, you gain an honor. But obviously the Way of the Lion card is really, really powerful. So you can't directly compare them, but Way of the Crane is just a little bit more flexible, right?
Yeah. Also, it's a persistent effect. It's almost like an attachment as an event, just because the honored status sticks around, even though the event does not, whereas other things like Bonsai and Way of the Lion only last until the end of the conflict or the end of the turn. So it's persistent. If you have a lot of fade-on characters, then you get more and more value out of Way of the Crane. So yeah, 3 times in every Crane deck, basically until the end of time, probably.
Forever.
Probably.
Yep.
The life of the
Card's
game.
good.
until we have a
so
Crane
far,
deck that
so-
has either low glory or doesn't care about honor, then this is in every deck. All right.
The weird part is, you say Crane. I feel like you would splash this card in every deck that you could play it in.
But you can't.
If you could.
But
you can't.
But
You know
you
you
can't. Yeah.
But you would if you could.
You would if you could.
So.
If it was like 10 influence, nah, you probably wouldn't if it was 10 influence, but still.
No. If it were like 5 influence, you'd probably still play 1.
Yeah. Anyway, Gentry, can you take us into our next event?
Emit Defeat is real good. It is 1 influence. 2 influence actually. 1 cost event that says action. Choose a character that is defending alone. Bow that character. It is 2 influence. I said that at the beginning, but I feel like this is the point where it goes. It's really good. There's a lot of cards, like we said, that kind of push Crane into a duelist kind of build, where you want as much as possible to be alone in fights with your character, or want your opponent's characters to be alone against you. And in any of those situations, you know, it's pushing towards Emit Defeat, and Emit Defeat legitimately just says that you win the conflict. If there's a conflict where you can play Emit Defeat, you win that conflict, or at least don't lose it.
Yeah.
If they manage to bow your character somehow as well, but
Yeah. So.
I mean, like we said before, bow effects are good. This is a bow effect. Play it in your deck. You're not going to be upset.
Yep. So even better. So here's how I like to defend Admit Defeat for anyone who has doubts about its playfulness. While Admit Defeat is a card, and you're playing the game against Crane, you have to keep it in your mind. Meaning that if you want to play around Admit Defeat, you have to defend every single Crane conflict with at least 2 characters. Plain and simple. The only downside to this card really is that it can only be used while attacking. If this could be used while your opponent attacks with a single guy, this card would be busted as hell.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it is definitely worded to not, to be relatively balanced, but I think it's pretty straightforward. It's a really good card for attacking. It bows a character. It makes your opponent have to use up more resources, which is always really good. And if they're not planning on using more resources, then you're just handed a free province.
For real. Yeah, I mean, there's not much else to say, really. It's a fantastic card. It generates character advantage for you. You can always attack with 1 guy like a brash samurai, and your opponent's going to feel obligated to defend with 2. Another nice thing about this card is its design. I love it because it's a design that you can inherently play around by just playing smarter. So if you know this card exists, you can play around it by just sending 2 characters to defend, or forcing your opponent to send more than one character to attack, so that it's at least even. So there's a lot of ways you can kind of play around it, but if you get into a situation where it's active, it's very likely could just ruin you.
Yeah, this is a really good and balanced card. Again, at 2 influence, very splashable because the effect is so versatile on the attack. I think Unicorn might like this. Who knows?
Yeah.
Lion might splash it.
Yeah, I could definitely see both of those splashing it in.
Yeah, this is just another card Lion really want to splash, I think. Just maybe only as a 1-of this time, maybe a 2-of, but like if you like have this like swarm military deck and your opponent just like says, I'm just gonna chump block and give you the win, so that like maybe you don't break the province quite yet, or maybe I'm just trying to deny the honor, then yeah, you know, Admit Defeat's a good card.
So kind of theory crafting a little bit on Lion. It looks like they want to be a deck or a clan that wants to put your opponent on a 4-turn clock, right? You're going to win 4 military conflicts in a row on attack and basically break a province each time, and this makes that easier. So, and it punishes your opponent for being stingy in dropping characters against how many characters you're dropping.
Yeah, and I said this is a character advantage card, so in a way, it makes it, I don't know, actually, maybe it's not as good than Lion as I think, because this card really shines if you attack with just 1 character, but still, it can be useful to Lion just because it could get you a province you otherwise wouldn't. Plain and simple.
Again, bow effects are going to be good in this game. Until I'm convinced otherwise, we'll see.
Bow's gonna, it's good stuff, right? Bow is a solid thing, because like this game, at the end of the day, it's stats versus stats, and Bow denies stats, so it's gonna be good. All right, Dan, I think you got the last card of the Crane that we know of so far. Hit us off with the last one here.
Yes, I get the last card, and it's one of my favorites. It is Noble Sacrifice. It is a 1-cost event. It has an action: sacrifice a friendly honored character, choose a dishonored character, discard that character, and it is 2 influence. Obviously, I think we talked about your play with the Brash Samurai way back when you were talking about Brash Samurai, maybe an hour and a half ago or something like that. But this card is fantastic. Character removal is sort of at a premium in this game in a way. We've seen limited effects like Asawa Masahiro, which is printed 2 cost, Assassination printed 2 cost. So the ability to, if you create a situation where you've dishonored a character that might have a ton of fate on it too, right? If you dishonored a character like that and you just can get rid of them off the board, is really, really powerful.
This is the Crane version of I Can Swim. And I Can Swim was a Scorpion card that was revealed relatively early on that I believe read, you can only play it if your dial shows a higher number than your opponent and you discard a dishonorable character. And it costs 2. So it costs 1 more, and you have to have a higher dial than your opponent. And
additionally, I Can Swim has to be used on a participating dishonored character controlled by the opponent.
Oh,
so
wow,
it's even
even
more
worse.
limited than Noble Sacrifice.
yeah, it's just like direct comparison here. The only thing different between this and I Can Swim, they both require a dishonored character, right? This doesn't require the dishonored character be in a conflict. The only other cost is that you have an honored character, and it actually costs 1 less than I Can Swim. And I would argue that having an honored character as Crane is a lot easier than the other things you need to have for I Can Swim. So if I Can Swim's a good card, this card is real good. And if you can ever just discard a Chud for their clan champion, this card is game winning. You just need to land a dishonor once and then have 1 action window. That's it. So like after a conflict, if you are first player, you can just play this.
Although I think this card is really, really good, there is, because I do think it's relatively comparable to I Can Swim solely because you are sacrificing a character. That being said, it's not that bad because you can usually just get rid of like a 1 cost that you weren't using anyway, and it actually doesn't say they have to not be bound, so you could actually just use a character in a conflict and then kill them afterwards, which is stated before. So a lot of times you could just kill off a character that's already going to die. I think 9 times out of 10 this is going to be way better than I can swim, but I can see situations where it might be a little bit worse.
It certainly can be clunky, just because, again, Crane are like about assembling these pieces. This requires you to have an honored character, your opponent to have a dishonored character, you to have a fate, and you to want to be able to trade your character for theirs. Now, granted, you can leverage that. Again, we talked about turn 1 Brash Samurai attacking alone, honoring himself, winning a fire ring, and then dishonoring any opponent's character with the fire ring. So you target their most valuable character with the most fate. You play this card, you gain an honor. Your Brash Samurai was exhausted anyway. He was pretty much done for the turn, and he had no fate on him. So you traded your used Brash Samurai. You got the maximum value out of him you already were for someone that they haven't gotten anything out of and probably spent a lot on. It can be a very swingy card. And I think unless it ends up being a dead card often enough, it'll probably be a 3 times in your deck just so you have it when you want it.
And 2 influence means it's splashable. So Lion Clan, which has guys that honor themselves with the pride keyword, same type of combo.
I'm not so sure in Lion. I think you have to have a specific deck that also has the ability to dishonor as well as honor. If Lion have enough courtiers, then they can play For Shame. Yeah, it's great.
Right.
This is really good with For Shame too, because more often than not, they'll probably choose to dishonor their valuable guy rather than bow him, because then they'll still have stats in the conflict. So this can be really dangerous if you get For Shame played against you, against a Crane player or someone splashing Crane. Keep in mind this card, especially if they have Fate. So yeah. Just again, removal and control are good. Like every card game ever. And that will bring us to the end of the currently revealed Crane cards. There are still 2 cards that we do not have full spoilers for, but we will cover them later on if they so show up. So guys, I want to ask, now that we've seen all the cards and we kind of have an idea of where the Crane lie and what their game plan is, how would you rate their overall looks as a clan competitively?
That's an interesting question that I don't think can actually be answered yet. Again, this is very much a game where we only have 2 clans worth of cards out right now. And
not even.
yeah, not even completely those 2. So it looks like it could be good, but it's 100% dependent on how all of the other clans function and what all of their cards are. But I can see there's a lot of viability, and it looks like a relatively versatile deck at the very least.
Yeah, versatility
so
is pretty good.
For me, I'm going to echo those sentiments as well, saying it's going to be hard to fully evaluate everything. They definitely look good. You don't think anything's bad, right? Whereas I think people had mixed feelings about seeing some of the other clan cards. I think all of the Crane cards that we've seen so far, I mean, maybe some of them we have mixed opinions about. I think there was just a small handful, but most of them seem very, very strong. Additionally, as we see more of the Lion cards, the comparison gets a lot easier, right? I think you've already mentioned a number of times, Travis, where the Lion cards look kind of dangerous. And so it's interesting comparing those to similar type Crane effects or effects Crane don't even have access to, right? But right now they look very strong, either as an honor gaining clan or just breaking province with political, because they seem to have a lot of the good political characters so far.
Yeah, and what I meant mostly by this question wasn't for you guys to make a perfectly informed decision on the Crane clan. I was more or less digging to we see their strategy. Does it seem like it will work and be consistent enough to be a viable strategy? I think my answer to the question is yes. They have control effects out the wazoo. They have the only cancel we've seen so far, and it's a clan-specific cancel, which leads me to believe that cancels will be rare in this game. There will not be many neutral cancels, or they will be very expensive. So I think Crane will have their niche as the faction that is able to sort of have answers to a lot of tricks. What they are weak to, I believe, will largely be effects that will cancel out their tricks, or characters that can't be bowed, or effects that ready characters. So we'll have to see how many of those there are. And if there's a lot of them, then Crane might struggle. But as a core package, I think Crane have a really solid package here. They have lots of stats with honored characters. They have lots of ways to honor their characters to get those stats. And they have some really powerful control effects to supplement their high stats. They also have the ability to gain a lot of honor decently quickly and reach an honor victory if it's their plan to win within maybe 4 or 5 turns.
Yeah, and honestly, I believe that, looking at what we've seen so far, that's probably what will end up happening. They look like a deck where the control seems pretty good, and I think there are maybe like some very specific builds that'll lean in certain other directions, but I think largely this will be the faction that wins based on honor, or the most likely candidate for the deck that wins based on honor because of the way that we've seen. But it has a little bit of versatility in that it still has the ability to break provinces and things. But I think out of the box, most players, at least at like a basic level, will look at it and try and figure out how to best break provinces. I think this will be one of the few decks that kind of breaks that cycle and like finds a slightly different way to win. And I think that'll kind of be where its competitive viability comes from, is the ability of your opponent to work around or not be able to work around that because of the way that they're building.
Yeah. Like, again, I think this is a game where like a control style can really shine just because of the fact that everything slowly disappears off the board. And it seems like they're going to be the premier honor victory control style, which seems right up my alley. I like that style in old 5R a little bit. I like that it's a lot more interactive now. It's not so much playing like honor solitaire. It's more I have to actually like participate in conflicts and defend your conflicts in various ways and make sure that I'm not spending too much honor drawing a lot of cards, or I'm trying to put you in situations where you're giving me honor without it impacting my loss condition too badly. So it's great.
Yeah, I think the best thing you can hope for out of looking at core set cards is being excited about playing all the clans, and having seen all of the Crane cards that we've seen, I'm excited to play with those cards.
Yeah, I think there's no clan I'm not excited to play.
Admittedly,
right, that's the hope,
true.
right? So going into it, the cards that you're going to see, you're going to be like, oh, I'm really excited to play this clan, right? And all of the cards we've seen, I totally agree. I'm excited to play with everything, but as we get more and more reveals, maybe something doesn't strike us, right? But you hope that every clan that they preview and every card from the core set that we see, you're going to get a viable option. My pie in the sky hope, right, is that every clan is viable out of the core set. I don't know if that's actually going to happen from a competitive perspective, but it's a hope.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. And I think we have like this foundation of cards, and we can always update our opinions based on what we see in the future. That's always like a completely cool thing about seeing cards swelled up slower times. Right now, one of the main cards that I was pretty mad on is Above Question, but then maybe we see more neutral cards that are like For Shame, and like really make a neutral control package, or maybe there's certain clans that just have so many devastating events, Scorpion, that suddenly I look back at Above Question, I'm like, a little better now. maybe yes I do run you.
Yeah, I'm interested to see how Lion match up with the rest of the Crane card pool, because they're going to be kind of like the military foil to Crane's political foil. And then Scorpion, like you said, might just be a high event package, and they're kind of going to be the dishonor foil to Crane's honor foil.
Yeah, I'm looking so forward to seeing what every clan does here. And even though Crane are a political foil, I am not necessarily convinced that their military is that weak here. They've got some really solid military characters and control to back them up, and they still have access to the neutral military events that are quite impactful. So who knows? Maybe Crane are actually one of the more centralist factions with a little bit of a political focus, and maybe Scorpion or Phoenix have a really high political focus. But
I'll
it
be-
seems
yeah.
like Lion are like all in on military. Like they just win a military conflict. Like you said, they have a 4-turn clock. They win a military conflict every turn. They honor their characters, use that honor to draw 5 cards, and just stay high pressure the entire game. But we'll
pretty
have to
much.
see how their card pool plays out. We have only seen maybe like a third of it at this point. I think we've seen.
Oh, not even, right? We've seen like 5
Uh,
cards.
No, we've seen 7. I know we've seen 3 from the conflict deck, and I think 7 from the Dynasty. So we've seen 10 of their 24. So we've seen a little, real close to half at this
Oh
point.
yeah, okay. I'm looking at 12 right now. I guess including their Stronghold. So
Oh yeah, including the Stronghold. And I might be missing a card there too. Who knows? We've seen kind of close to half of the total Lion cards. We're getting there, but we're getting an idea. We haven't seen a lot of really great political strength from the Lion at all. They're really all in on the military conflict,
yes,
which is fitting, to say the least. They never really cared for court anyway. But that's about
Yeah,
it.
I'll be honest. Going forward, it's not quite it. I plan on playing military Crane when this comes out. Unless something like strikes me really strongly. I mean, I'm going to play Unicorn regardless. I've already expressed that. But I actually am. I have some ideas right now. I think for military Crane, it sounds like a lot of fun.
and like Travis said, there are a ton of very high-powered Crane military cards, like a lot of 3s that you can play around with. So they're definitely a threat in that area, as opposed to being like, from what we've seen from Lion so far, it looks like they're not going to be able to compete in the political area much at all, or they're going to have some sort of side way to make it so that way your opponent, they can't lose politically and force you to just do military conflicts.
Yeah. That's pretty much it. I think Lion are just going to put so much pressure on those military conflicts that you feel like you have to contest them, and that's sort of how they defeat against the political decks. Or they're just willing to trade, which is probably also fine. One of the two. Yeah, that's about...
Yeah, losing a province is the end of the world, right?
Yeah, for real. Again, especially in this game. The old game, when you lost a province, you would lose the card. Like, that province would be gone. You'd lose a card every single turn for the rest of the game. Now it's not nearly that bad. But that about wraps up.
I just want to cut you off one more time just because it's
God
fun.
damn it, Gentry.
Continue.
Yes.
Yes. So that about wraps up
We're
our
almost
discussion
at
on
4
the
hours
Crane clan here.
Skype.
Are we really? Oh boy.
Yeah.
But a lot of that was set up.
If you count the hour for setup, then it's like a 3-hour podcast.
Yeah, it went a little longer than I expected it to, but we got a lot of in-depth coverage, and I'm great. But anyways, thank you listeners for listening. That about wraps up our coverage of the Crane. I am Travis McDaniel, also known as Travis Bites Dragons. You can find me mostly on the Reddit and the Discord. I will occasionally pop into the FFG forums as well.
I am Alex Gentry, also Dark Destroy. Also on the Discord server and occasionally on the Reddit. I don't peruse Reddit as much as I should, I think, but...
And I'm Dan Henley, also known as Danwarr on the Discord and on Reddit and a bunch of other places on the internet. And I'm also an r/L5R mod, so don't piss me off.
Yeah, don't piss him off. He's also a lion, so like you know the rules. Just,
I'm lying for now, right?
just pretend he's right while he's around, and then when he walks away, then you can express your true feelings. That's
I'm
all we
okay
have
with
here today, folks. Thanks for listening to the Winter Court Podcast, and the table is yours until next time.